Okay, and so welcome to Cafe Charm. We're going to be talking about doing some charming scenes here. Now, I had French music playing before we started. This is the great thing about this is we can go to our local Starbucks, our local coffee houses. We're going to look at tips on sort of painting from photos that you may find of different cafes and things. So this isn't going to be Europe specific. I just had some really good success with a painting that I did in Laguna Beach at the Invitational that happened to be a cafe scene, and kind of partly sparked me into doing this because it's really no different than approaching another subject, but there's a lot of things to consider. So we're going to break those things down and look at some tools that we can use to make our cafe scenes better, and whether that's a coffee shop or a bistro or people sitting down waiting for waiters, regardless of the destination. So there'll be a lot of talking about kind of a better, I don't want to say better, but like proper ways to approach sketching in public, kind of how to do that and what to look for. Because really what that does is it just starts to build up your visual library. So most of the time, and if you guys have done street scenes with me before, you'll see that when I'm doing, I'm not copying the cars that are in the photograph, I'm going to put them where they need to be. And the same thing kind of goes with people. So the more you can kind of have a few different poses in your brain to draw from, then it won't really matter what's in the photo reference. Yes, we want the setting, we want the composition, but the idea of then inserting the players becomes a huge part of making a more interesting, believable kind of scene. And my process is it's never, I may have good photo reference, but it's never about copying that photo. It's about designing a painting. So we'll be talking about a lot about that. And then we'll talk about umbrellas and how to keep light on them and those kinds of things, and talking about composition and story. And we're going to do a bunch of smaller exercises and sketches and things, and then we're going to move into a larger idea of pulling that all together and implementing the painting. So there will be a demo that you can work from. In the last half of this, it will be more demo based. The first part is going to be more tool building and skill set leveling up, and hopefully creating some new habits. All right, so before I switch cameras and we just get into this, does anyone have any questions before we start? No? Okay.
I will say one thing.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Scott.
So after you painted that, the Laguna Beach one, I saw that, and I was recently on a trip in Savannah, and I dashed across the street at risk of life and limb to take a picture of a vegan restaurant called Fox and Fig down there that
Nice.
had the umbrellas. I'm like, I'm going to do that one day. So here's my opportunity.
Well, cool. Hopefully we'll give you some things, because there's always, the thing about cafe scenes is it's usually not moody and dark, like they're full of life and energy, and people are enjoying themselves. And I think that's really a lot of the big appeal of that is the colors that are involved, and the sort of feeling of, oh, I remember sitting at that cafe. And especially in the middle of winter, when we want to remember some of our more fun summer expeditions. I don't want to make anyone jealous, but I'll get to go to Mexico in February, so that I'll get my share of outdoor cafes and things there also. So, but for the most part, that idea of bringing that sort of fun atmosphere, really nice color compositions. We'll be talking a lot about complementary colors and using those. So this is going to be more of a colorful kind of experience. But actually the demo might not be super colorful. So we'll see. I don't know. I've got a couple things planned, and I really don't know how that's going to go. I like to just see how things kind of come together. Okay. And I'll be looking forward to seeing that painting, Scott. People really like these things. I don't know. I don't think I've ever had a cafe painting that hasn't sold, and if you look behind me, I got a ton of stuff back there that hasn't sold. So guess who's doing cafes all winter? Just kidding. But that idea of it's not about painting to the market or whatever, but when you find something that people enjoy, you want to be able to approach that in a confident manner, and then and have it be part of your stable of subjects that maybe you like to do. So, okay, I'm going to turn my camera over here, and we'll just get rolling here. And always be careful crossing the street, Scott. Watch out for that. Okay.
And you shouldn't be drinking when you're doing it.
Right. Well, lucky for you guys, it's only noon here, so I'm only on coffee at the moment. There we go, on the spotlight that. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right. I'll reposition this when we get into painting, but for the drawing section. Okay, so a lot of I like to draw. I'm constantly drawing, filling up sketchbooks. Most of the time, these are happening at cafes. So people sitting, people looking, people doing stuff, usually looking at their phone or at their computer. But that sort of idea of, oh, this guy came through the cafe and really caused a ruckus. Just kidding. But that idea of constantly looking and gaining that sort of visual library of knowledge. And there's so much of painting that copying a photo is one thing. Being able to kind of create something and bring some of your imagination into it is always going to elevate things. And for me, most of that comes from being able to just sit and sketch people. And I'm not putting this baby in anything, but taking the time to just kind of take notes of how people act, what people are doing, certain positions people may be sitting in, and if you look correctly, you don't even have to really worry about the rules of foreshortening or any of that stuff, because it's just they're just sketches. They're not models posed with their legs coming straight out at you. So that idea of looking, and I talked about this a lot, but I don't think I really talk a whole lot about the process for approaching this. And actually, in this little sketchbook, we got at my workshop in Balboa, Bob was there, and I did a quick one of him in motion, kind of breaking down his easel. But that was sort of a quick demonstration of like how to look and be patient and kind of wait for things. Because as you know, most people are not good models. They're gonna move around. They're gonna shift. They're not gonna stay the same way they are in a photo, because they're alive and moving. And a lot of times the issue with translating from a photograph is figures look really stiff, or maybe he's going the wrong way. So like this guy, he's walking into the cafe. I probably wouldn't paint it that way. I definitely wouldn't paint it that way. I would turn him around. Well, Dan, how can I turn him around? I don't know how to do that. Well, that comes from that experience of sitting and sketching. And both of these poses I can draw from my brain now, because they're just, I've done them. I studied it. I looked at it. They're 3-minute sketches. But that idea of, oh, I need a guy in a cafe. Let me see if I want a guy sitting kind of looking away. And I'll remember his collar kind of comes up this way. This arm is down. He's wearing a vest. This arm comes out onto the table. Vest comes out. I'm not looking at anything. I'm just doing this from memory, because I've put this into my visual archive. He's on the back side of the chair here. This arm's on the table. Maybe he's got some glasses on. He's got a cup of coffee here. This leg comes back. On the chair. maybe this leg comes in front. So anyway, just that idea of, well, I drew this once, I can probably figure out how to draw it again from memory, just because it's stored in there. So that's the importance of kind of, spending time in your sketchbook. Because if I need a guy sitting at a table, well, I got this. And, again, the idea of sketching and size does matter. So when I'm drawing, when I'm sketching, this is like an 8.5 by 11 size sketchbook. So, these guys are a certain size, and I've come into the idea of being able to draw comfortably around that size. So if I think about, when I'm sketching and I look, I'll probably start around this size in my sketchbook. I'm not drawing too big. I'm not drawing too small. But I know I can kind of work through and get a pretty fairly okay version of what may be happening here with this pose. And anytime I have someone in a hat in my picture, I probably just put it on there for an effect of framing in the figure or something. So anyway, I can't stress that enough. The idea of actually drawing from life to put these in your visual library of poses. And the reality is, when we're drawing for a painting too, like this guy, I think he's in that painting. I might have put him. No, I didn't put him in there. But the idea of when I'm actually going to put him in a painting, on an 11 by 14 or 12 by 6 painting within the whole scene, he's probably only going to be about this big. Maybe. Maybe he'll be about this big. So that idea of remembering the pose, thinking about the sketch, if I'm trying to draw too perfect or too whatever, I'm going to lose the gesture of that. So don't draw everything super small, and definitely don't do these missile people or Oscar statues are really common. And this isn't the figure workshop, but there are going to be figures involved in here, so I have to kind of address it, because the cafe setting, if you don't populate it, it will just look like a mid-COVID cafe with nobody in there hanging out. So we want to be able to sort of bring life and bring that sort of human energy into what we're doing. Okay, so Dan, people are moving. What am I supposed to do? Everyone's all over the place. How am I supposed to draw that? I will find a photo here, and we'll talk about it. So this is a live photo, and if I hold this down, you'll see him walking. Right. So one thing I'll do in the idea of sketching people or taking photo reference. So if you go into your camera, and if you have an iPhone, I don't know what it is on any other phone, but the idea of on the phone here, there's this little button up here, and that is going to be your live photo. So as people, if you take a live photo oh, here's someone walking by right now. Okay. So this lady's walking by carrying her thing. So in a photo, I get this one thing, but in a live photo, if I hold this down, I can get her to move. And it's just the same as taking one photo, but it captures the sort of before and after of it. And if you go into edit, and you'll see that little circle down here again, click that. And you can I can look for the best pose. So I can find a myriad of poses of her, and then I'll make that the key photo. So I might freeze the photo in sort of an off balance angle, so they don't look too stiff or too rigid. Now, when you are, so that's kind of, if if you take your reference photos with that live on, this is a great option to be able to find what you're looking for in that pose. So maybe I want her, just where her foot is about to touch, or she's fully extended. So that's a little trick. Now, the trick about drawing from life, and when I'm drawing for a painting, it's a little different than when I'm out sketching. When I'm drawing for a painting, we'll say this is the painting, and I say, okay, I'm gonna draw this, and I'm looking at the scene, or I've got it in my head, I figured it out, and I'm gonna move through as lightly and quickly as possible, and I'll stay connected to the paper. So I'll say there's a tree here, and then maybe there's a barn in here, a distance back here, maybe there's a distant hill back here, maybe there's a cow. So I'm going to move through in a way that is sort of fluid. When I'm sketching and people are moving, people's heads are turning, all those kinds of things are happening, I'm going to be a lot more patient. So that idea of drawing to actually draw, kind of, let's look at this guy back here. And generally speaking, I'll wait and see how people are behaving. So I'll look at somebody, and sometimes it's a little creepy, like you're just looking at somebody. But I'll usually try to be stealthful about it. Like I'll look away and then look back, look away, look back. Look over the top of my glasses, kind of not fully stare at them. But generally speaking, when people are hanging around, when they're I don't think this is a live photo. When they are, in that kind of setting, like this lady, she may look over at me, she may look back, she may reach forward and get her drink. But once I've decided on the pose that I want to draw, I'm going to be patient, and I'm gonna start to kind of think about or anticipate what she may do. So I may start with the idea of, okay, here's her head, and I won't even capture the full pose. I'll just start to say, okay, I know her head is here. She's got a hat on. And her neck comes down. I'm just going to leave it right here for now. Okay, so here's her head. And maybe she just moved. And I'm like, oh, great. Now I can't see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to sit there for a minute. And then maybe she'll move back. Okay, I can look at the ear, figure out where the ear is, figure out where her hair is. Get some more details in there. Oh, she just moved again. So then I'll just stop and wait. All right, so when she comes back, I know she's going to come back because she's comfortable sitting there. And I may say, okay, where's the angle of her arms? She's kind of coming out this way. And I'll measure. I'll look for where this arm is coming. I'm going to look for this shape in here that is being created. So I'm actually just drawing shapes. I can see where the scoop of her neckline is. Then I can see her arm comes out there a little bit more. This comes down. Oh, she just moved again. All right, well, I'm just going to wait. Okay, she came back. All right, good. Thank goodness she came back. So I can get the rest of this in. So it becomes a series of kind of stops and starts. And maybe I'll put some sunglasses on her. Oh, she moved again. Gonna stop. All right, she came back. So, remember to take your time, and, in that idea of enjoying that time sketching, don't be in a rush. And that's the main point is, she doesn't look very feminine. I have to give her more hair. And then I may correct it. But, in that idea of sketching, it's not about being perfect. It's about looking, measuring, putting this pose into my visual library. And I'll be off the paper here. But that idea of is look, draw what you can, they're going to come back. And I won't choose the pose that is the look away. So like really kind of paying attention and watching for a couple of minutes, and you know, see where they tend to just automatically kind of come back to. And you know, that's not any way of how I would draw for painting. But when I, you know, again, when I draw for painting and it's going to be probably about this size, I'll have the experience of looking and knowing and say, okay, well, I know if her head is this way and her neck is back, and then she's kind of coming out this way. And this arm comes down, this arm's plugged in here. The hand kind of disappears in there. She's really leaning forward on the chair and her leg comes up. This leg is out and down. That would put the chair about here with the back of the chair up here. And I would totally be able to just paint that figure from what's happening here. Okay, so it's an abbreviation, and it makes it easier to draw once you've spent the time kind of thinking about remembering of what angle was the head, what angle was her torso, where's her leg angle, where's this other angle, and then where is she in relationship to the chair. And I would probably even just melt her right into the chair there when I painted her. Okay, does that make sense in that way of not drawing perfectly what you're looking at, but sort of get the information you can use, get it again, and that's the real secret to sort of drawing on location. So when Bob was packing up his easel, this is not the best sketch in the world, because I was talking to two other ladies while I was doing it. Where is it? You know, he held this pose for like a couple seconds, and then he would stand up, do something else, and then lean back over, and then do something else, lean back over. So, you know, in that idea of sketching movement, wait until, and I tried to go out and get video this morning. I went to the coffee shop and there was nobody there. And I'm like, oh, come on, there's nobody here. Because I wanted to take a video and do that in real time of sort of how I look and how I sketch. And, you know, this is a fairly abbreviated. It's just really just a couple lines there, but it's captured the sort of angle and pose. And in a cafe scene, she would be a side note. She would be this tiny little thing sitting on a bench. But I could probably draw that from life, just thinking about what's happening with that pose. So the importance of building that visual library is, I can't stress that enough. All right. And in that way of how to draw, don't scratch, don't do this. Kind of make calculated, measured movements the same way we do when we paint. And let's see, let me find another good one. That's a weird guy. All right, well, here's a lady. And also the sort of looking away pose, or like the 3/4 pose, it becomes really a lot more attainable. So, you know, in a lot of my paintings, you won't see a whole lot of faces. You'll see a lot of 3/4 views. If you see a face, it may be a little further back. But I mean, I do more and more the more I get comfortable with it. But, you know, in the idea of what's the pose for this lady, and I always start at the top and work my way down. So I'll say, okay, here's her head. And when there's hair, I'm going to just draw that hair shape in, and that will help define where the shoulder is. And then I can say, okay, where's that shoulder come out? And it comes out to about here. And I'm going to go look the distance here to here, the distance here to here. And I'll think about that. And that, you know, I'm looking at how far out this comes from her head. Where is that in relationship to this? And then I'll put a line or two, and they're brief, right? They're abbreviated lines. I'm not drawing like this. I'm sort of looking for those connections, looking for where those lines may be. And then her comes down here, and she's got her purse because she's in Venice and she doesn't want to get pickpocketed. So I can look at where that comes down there. Her other shoulder comes out here. And then she's got this sort of long coat on that comes down here. Where does that end in relationship to the bag? And then where's her leg in relationship to that? So it's actually in a little bit more. And how far is that? And I'm really just kind of cluing into the idea of the silhouette and not worried at all about the detail. And then her feet would be down here. And then if I want her on her phone, I'll bring her hand up here because everyone's on their phone. And I can just make that up and say, okay, I've drawn people on their phones before. Now she's looking at the menu online before she goes in. All right, so that idea of approaching drawing in that segmented way and essentially from life, it's a lot easier. Well, it's harder from life, but it's easier in the sense that I can't keep second guessing myself. I can't keep, she's going to be moving, she's going to be in motion. So I've got, a few minutes to say, all right, there's that head shape defining the shoulder. And, I've done this before, so I know this arm comes out. All right, now what's going on with her bag? Let me wait a second. Okay, there it is. I can see that, and it's connected in through here. Where's the angle her coat kind of bumps out here? That just gives a little bit of personality to what she's doing. And that idea of that would be perfect for what I might need in a painting. Okay, so if you don't get out and sketch, do it. It's a lot of fun. Usually you end up meeting people. Sometimes people, they're very excited about what you may or may not be doing. But it's a huge part of being able to invent figures into your, incorporating them into your scene aside from what may be happening. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we get into the idea of creating a story within our composition. Any questions on what we just talked about there? Okay, and and again, I can't stress enough the idea of usually, this is going to lead to a much more natural way of drawing. If you're saying, okay, there's a head, and heads are not like that. Generally, I'm going to mass in the head and neck, and this shape is not a circle at all. But in that idea of looking at someone and looking and seeing their neckline, it doesn't work with me because I'm wearing a scarf today, or a bandana. But if I wasn't wearing this, you would be seeing this whole strip here. Okay, and that's what I'm gonna mass in. The same way, in that idea of removing detail, I'm even removing a chin. I'm just putting this meat slab essentially, and what that ends up looking like is usually it's going to be more, if anything, I might do an oval, and that's going to be basically the head and neck. If I put the neck shadow, and then put some ears on them. All right. And then the shoulders would be there. So that neckline extends down below the shoulders. So that's this guy's going to the disco. He's got his shirt all unbuttoned. Okay, so that's some thoughts on sketching and learning to draw, learning to see people, learning to, there's a lot more on figures, of course, but I have to talk about it a little bit when it comes to cafe sketching. And the best thing about cafe sketching is you've got a steady supply of models walking through. So if you just find a place to sit, and maybe you'll see someone just sitting there, that's the best, is they're just sitting there on their computer, and they're more often than not looking down. This guy was, he's looking down, but he made for a great model because he wasn't moving anywhere. This girl kept touching her, kind of putting her hands up to her mouth, And I was like, oh, she's gonna move. I'm gonna lose that. And I ended up saying, you know what? She keeps doing it. I think she's gonna keep coming back to that. So I was able to kind of get in there, and that just makes much more of an interesting kind of thing than someone who's just sitting there. All right. Okay. All right. Now, in that idea of drawing people, if you never draw people and you want to do one of these kinds of scenes, you're going to have a real hard time. So this idea, this sketching, you can do this while you watch TV. You can do this while you spend a few minutes in the morning. If you do a go to any kind of cafe, Starbucks, any of that kind of thing, anything where there's people that are just sitting around, that's where I'm going to go and find my inspiration for the models that I'm going to put into a painting. This guy, this is just a little like 6x6 sketch, but that's just from memory. The whole thing of just this guy he's sitting there leaning, sort of heavier set guy, but it captures the mood of what he's doing there. Same thing, with all these figures in here, those are all just made up. This guy was there at one point, but he left. There's a lady here, her hairdo sitting there. But you can also see how much information I don't need. So when people are sitting and when there's umbrellas and when there's shadows, really all I really need to say that this is a person is the sort of idea of this head, shoulder, and arm. Same thing, there's a little bit more happening there in this waiter. He's a little bit more in sunlight, but even his head just melts right into that shadow shape. And there's no legs there. I mean, the legs are just down there in the shadow area. These people are all in shadow back there. So the only thing I really need is this idea of the head and shoulders. And I talk about that a lot. But that idea of what our brain is going to look at and identify something as a person is essentially this shape. I'm going to do this with 1, 2 strokes, and I'll wiggle it down. And that's a person in shadow. Okay, your brain will not think of that as anything else. It's not a cactus. It's not a, I guess it could be an apple with a really thick stem. I don't know. And then if I just put a little ear on him, and if I end up putting a little hat, then he's definitely a person. Like there's nothing that could be. So thinking in those terms of simplifying to communicate is kind of what I do with everything, but especially what I do with people. So this is a fun little experiment to kind of try. Just take your brush and make a vertical mark, and then think about where shoulders might be on that. And all of a sudden I've got, in the idea of a background, this would be a completely acceptable couple of figures. And we'll get into some of this when we're painting here in just a minute. But the approach and the way I'm using my brush here is no different than what I would do in a setting of a painting. And the quicker you can break into that idea of what is the silhouette, the better your figures will end up being. Okay. All right, let me think. Is there anything else on that? This isn't a figure lesson. I'm not going to get all into this. I really wanted to more concentrate on the approach of like how to draw people in motion is patient based. It's, when they're sitting there, get as much of it as you can. Take note of the angle of the head, maybe even where that collar is on there and where the slope of the shoulder is. Oh, he just moved. Okay. Well, I've got to start. Okay, he just came back. Maybe he got up for a refill and came back and sat down. I could see where his ear and maybe where his hairline is. All right, he just got up. All right, let's see, maybe he's wearing one of those puffy vests. All right, so there's the armhole. All right, what happens next? All right, where's his arm in relationship to everything else? I'll put that in. Oh, he just moved. All right, where's that vest end? All right, where's his bottom half? Maybe he's on the counter and he's got his laptop. And all of a sudden I've got a guy looking at his laptop, which would be a great thing to put in. That's what people are doing. So take it slow, but get the information you can use at the time of when you can use it. And if it's not there and you don't know how to make it up, just wait. They're going to return back to that pose probably in a couple of seconds. This guy's on he's on a bar stool. So their leg would be back here somewhere. All right. Okay. Any thoughts on that? Has anyone gone out and sketched in that way and found themselves overwhelmed or found themselves frustrated with people moving? If you have, try it again and be patient. Usually when I'm sitting there waiting for people to come back into their position is when people want to come over and see what I'm doing. And I'm like, I'm waiting for this guy to come back into place. So it's, I'll never feel pressured to just draw or paint if someone just happens to come over, and that's going to be their one experience, when to me it's much more important what my experience is in doing that. So give yourself that space. And if it's a time, same thing, plein air painting, if it's you're in the middle of something and you're waiting for something to dry, don't feel like you just have to perform. You're not a monkey to perform for whoever happens to be walking by. Okay, so that's the first note, is a little bit on sketching and gaining the ability to bring figure into your painting. The next thing, we're going to talk a little bit about umbrellas and awnings. And this really tends to trip people up, so I want to focus in on it just a little bit. Generally speaking, we're going to have a triangle or a dome or an angled sort of awning coming out. Those are the basic forms, and they need to be developed just a little bit more than that. And just to recap what I'm doing, I'm kind of dissecting what we're going to be putting in this scene, and then we're going to pull it all together. But the other thing I see a lot are weird umbrellas like that, or I don't know, weird misshapen umbrellas, or things that are meant to be going back in perspective, and they are I can't even do it wrong. They're coming like this. So there's no like kind of perspective theory. So getting to that shape is important. It's important to make things feel believable. And if we look at, okay, I don't know if that's a good example. Let me find one. Okay, these umbrellas here. So I painted this. This is a photo, but I painted these umbrellas in Laguna also. And dealing with that kind of a scallop shape, like it doesn't matter. It won't really matter to the painting if I'm copying that exact thing of these umbrellas that haven't been sort of pushed up all the way. So I'll defer to an ideal kind of situation. And again, happening from life, it tends to happen a little more automatically when you're painting from life, because things are moving, there's movement. You probably won't really clue into the idea that this looks like a upside down, scalloped shell. So when I'm approaching a painting with reference like this, I'll say, all right, well, what's happening here with the umbrellas? It doesn't matter that they're doing that. Is this cafe famous for those umbrellas? Or can I just make this into a more believable umbrella? And so I may just simplify that shape and say, all right, well, maybe there's one little scoop. All right, maybe I'll do one. one little scoop. But more often than not, I'm probably just going to say, well, it's just arcing this way, which means it's kind of tilted towards me just a little bit. In a lot of settings, when it comes to umbrellas, I'm actually going to flip it the other way. So if I have my umbrella here, and I want, because I'm going to want maybe some dark under there, so maybe I'll flip it this way just a little bit, and then put in the underside where I can get some of that shadow. I can hide the stick into that shadow with the stick, the pole, to make that connected where I don't just have this shape and then I've got this dark thing plugged in underneath. They both work, but depending on my point of view, depending on what I'm doing, the main point of this is I'm going to look for the ideal of what that umbrella is. So if it's a domed umbrella, I'll probably be a little careful, and I'll draw up to the middle, find that middle section. Okay, that length feels good. And then I'll bring it back this way. And again, I'll either arc this way a little bit or arc it this way a little bit, so it's not just a straight line. And that's where this other piece comes hanging down from. And then if that's arced this way, this is going to kind of copy that arc there. And I might get some shadow back in there. So that idea of finding the center line and then drawing half and then drawing half will usually get you into something that feels a little more natural than trying to just do this balloon arc, right? And those same principles come to, like, if this was hanging down, if this had a little hanging down thing, whatever is happening underneath there is going to match the arc of that. If it's more of a fringed umbrella. And even from that, from here, I could put in the idea of an underside if I want to frame in, if there's going to have a lot of light on that, and I really want to frame in the idea of the light, then if I put that dark underneath, it's going to make this feel a lot brighter. And we'll get into that in 1 second. And the main thing, with awnings coming out, they have to feel like they're in perspective. And one of the things I talk about a lot is if I'm standing here, this is me, and I'm looking out at my scene, more often than not, I'm going to compose things on my eye line. So, and I'm going to assume everyone else is my height. So if there's someone back here that I'm looking at and they're looking at me, they're probably going to be on my eye line looking back at me. And he's going to say, "What are you looking at? I'm going to fight you." Okay. But the idea is I'm composing my scenes to where I'm looking. And what happens with perspective with that is that anything on this sort of my eye line, it will be fairly horizontal. Anything up from that is going to start to sort of, I'll start to get perspective from that fanning out, getting bigger. So if this guy's in front of an awning and he needs to stand underneath it, that will be only slightly, if the road's going back this way, only slightly angled because it's just above his eye line. And then as we go up higher, that starts to arc more. So if this is where the awning is, and then anything below, I usually keep fairly flat. I don't get into a whole lot of tricky forced perspective. So if there's a window here and this is coming up, then this gets a little sharper. And as we go up, it gets sharper and sharper, angled down. But that doesn't do anything to what's on my eye line. And that keeps believable perspective without getting too crazy of, well, this comes out, this comes out. Well, not in my world, because then things are going to start to get too severe. So that's a softening of perspective by only sort of dealing with perspective above the eye line and almost fairly ignoring anything with perspective below the eye line. And, you know, if I'm looking straight on this building, the building's grounded there. And the building's coming up. It's going to give me a more believable kind of sense of what I'm looking at than if I get too crazy with too much perspective. But the main takeaway from this is I'm usually composing on my own eye line. And that means, you know, unless I raise the horizon up really far or put it really low, which those don't become like everyday paintings, my everyday paintings. It's more, I'm assuming that I'm looking at things from my height and people are looking back at me at that height. And that keeps things manageable in the way that I can compose a scene. Okay, another important thing when it comes to if we're doing a scene with a cafe and an umbrella, we're probably going to be fairly concerned about keeping the light and luminosity into that section. And okay, if we come into here, so we've got a nice light there on our waitress, and you know, there's this lady's in the sun, but she's in the shadow. All these other ladies are in the shadow. This lady is out in the sun, but that balance of where's the shadow and where's the light. But ultimately, all of the light is going to be hitting the tops of the umbrellas. And if I don't retain that luminosity at the beginning of the painting, and people always try this, they try to make their umbrellas redder, or they try to make them more yellow, and they'll really cake that pigment on at the end, and it just throws off the tonal qualities of the whole painting. And I'll do a bad one and I'll do a good one. So let's say I have an umbrella here. No big deal. Really simple. And I've got this guy sitting underneath it. There's a table. It's just a little sketch. And you're doing your painting. And you cut around your umbrella while the paper's white. And you put in your background, you put in your trees. And then you come and you paint this. And you want to frame around this guy. And you sort of, you know, if you think about segmenting things, what happens is we get these disconnected kind of ghosty things. Put in some ground there. And if the umbrella is going to stay white, that's fine. Or if the guy is in light, that's fine. But generally what happens is then you want to come in and paint. Okay, this guy has a face. And he's supposed to be in shadow. And he's got hair. And he's got a green shirt on. And then he's sitting on a tree, on a tree, sitting on a chair. And already this thing is completely disconnected. So you see all these little like white bits. He's not, it's a disjointed kind of idea. And in a full painting, in a little sketch like this, you won't notice it as much. But in a full painting, it's going to feel completely not connected to the rest of the painting. And then all of a sudden, oh, you know what? I want a really red umbrella. So I'll come in here and get some really, I want it red. It's got to be really, really red. So I'm going to get it really red. And I'm going to paint this thing on and stick it on there. And it has nothing to do with anything else that's happening in the painting. So in the idea of keeping light, keeping the tonal qualities kind of correct. And I'll try not to draw this one any better, but I'm going to try to paint it better in the same basic idea. So here's my umbrella. Here's a guy sitting here enjoying his coffee. He's at a table. Table has legs. He's got legs. The chair, look at the bottom of the table. Okay, so in the idea of, well, how can I approach this to retain light and be able to build a complex shadow? And it really has to do with making sure you get a good underpainting in. So we're going to want this umbrella to stay nice and translucent, nice and vibrant. So as I start with that background, and I'll stay with the same kind of idea of color. So there's going to be some sort of greens back here. And yeah, I will cut around the umbrella. So I'll start out the same way. And this person's in shadow. I'm going to go right through with that background color. But before this dries, now I'm going to take a really nice translucent red that's more the consistency of what's happening here. And I'll drop that in and I'll let it blend into its surroundings and let it sort of drip down. And this is going to cast red light. So maybe I'll drop some reds into here because it's casting some kind of reddish shadow. And then I'll put in my ground. Okay, so now I've got something established already from the get-go. And the trick is now I have to let this dry. And if I want even a little bit more light coming onto this, right, maybe I'll drop just a little bit of water in here. And I'm going to bring the light in from this side. So I'll drop some water in there to lighten that up. I should have done it a little bit earlier, but it's okay. And now I need to let that dry because this becomes an underpainting. And this is going to become super important in this kind of scene because most of the time, the majority of the people are going to be sitting under the umbrella or under the awning. And if we don't have something established first, then trying to get the tone to work where it's actually melted into the shadow areas, that's not going to happen unless we plan for it ahead. So I'm just going to blow dry this to speed it up. Okay, so that should be pretty dry now. And that was just the first pass. So let's say there are trees behind there. So now when I come in with my second layer, now I'm actually painting what are going to end up being the trees. And now I will cut this in a little bit more carefully. See, there's a little break there. And I would then paint these more of how they're supposed to be painted. I'll be careful about the shape of the umbrella, but this is also going to be just a little bit thicker than what was in that first wash. So the idea of now cutting out, but it is also still translucent. So the idea of cutting out that shape, I may get a little red glow off of that. And that's going to help, like you can see a little bit of it up in here. That's going to just help with the connectivity of the painting. And I'll say this umbrella has a little bit of that. So this is now all of this behind the umbrella. And I'll cut this in. And maybe I can cut in a little bit of the idea of little scoops. And I might be a little careful about framing out my figure now, maybe the top of the table. Under here, I can put all those darks. And even in his legs, if this background comes through, because this part of him is under the table, so I can even start to put that in. And it's still not done though. So this becomes a multi-level or just letting Rafa into the room here. So while this is wet now back in there, I'm going to come in and drop some even darker darks. So this becomes a little bit thicker of pigment. And I'll ground that, put in some other darks. And that's going into this wetness. So anything dark I put is still not going to be that dark. And at this point, I may even come in with some water and just blend into the figure a little bit. Just to kind of really just disappear his bottom half into there. Okay. And I did lose his head, so I'm just going to pull that back out. All right. So yes, he's negated, but he's negated with a tone underneath. And while that's drying, now I have to kind of wait and let that dry again. And maybe I'll put a little bit, now I can use just a little bit of a deeper red, darker red. And I'll say, okay, yeah, this part is hanging down. So that's not getting as much light. So maybe I'll put in that idea of either the hanging down part of the umbrella. Maybe there's a little, one of those little scoops up at the top. Okay, and I'm sort of stuck now until this dries, because the next layer is going to be this figure, and it's still not going to be, I still haven't used anything even remotely opaque yet, but I've got now sort of 2 layers on here. I'm going to blow dry this again just to speed things up. 1 second. Hi, Rafa. Okay, so that's enough drying there. So now I will come in with some thicker pigment, and I'm going to use a little bit of cobalt turquoise and red. And you can see how creamy this is now that I'm mixing here. All right, so this is a lot less water. This isn't washy at all. But I'm going to get into this a little bit of sort of a purpley neutral. A little bit more red. There we go. And the same way that I was talking about doing figures, where I'm just putting a mark and then moving my brush around, I'm going to sort of do that here, and put in his head. All right, now you see how that's popping off out of the background without it. It's still not. It's not black. It's a darker color, but it's being, he's definitely in the shadow of this umbrella now. And maybe I'll say he's partially in the light. So the shadow of that umbrella is now cutting down this way. And because I've got that red underneath, I'm okay to keep him red. If this was still white, there's no way I'd be able to join this in this way. Okay, so now I'll just worry about the dark. So this will just be, I'll just take this red, I'll add a little bit of blue to it. This will be fairly dark. And I can put in the underneath of the table here. I can put in the idea of where this stand is. And then where this table is. Bring some dark for his leg there. Put in the idea of where the chair is, and then coming back down to the shadow, and he's partially in shadow. This umbrella is going to cast a shadow, so I'll think about where's that shadow shape. Light's coming this way, so the shadow's getting a little longer back towards this way. And, you know, it does take more work, but what it is it's more thought. So that idea of painting it completely separate and trying to get strong color, I've created stronger color by this neutral color background, or this, complementary green in the background. Now, if I want a little bit more detail in the figure, I may say, well, here's some gouache. I might take a little bit of this reddish color over here, and I'm just going to dip into my gouache, and I'm gonna mix that together. I don't want this to become white, but maybe I want a little bit more light on there. So maybe he does have a hat. Right, there's a little more detail there. Maybe just a little bit where his face might be. And here's a little more gouache. Maybe I need to fix the shape of the shoulder a little bit. So even though there's light there, I can just dry brush just a little bit to correct that shape. Maybe there's a little glass on the table. And then maybe the back of this chair is getting a little light too. So I can just come in and put a little light there to gouache out the back of that. A little pull at the top, a little light on the front. And all of a sudden I've got something that feels way more together and cohesive and sort of painted together than this sort of separation idea of watercolors. And that's essentially what I'm going to go for, to retain light on the umbrella, retain that translucency, and make sure that the figure isn't, it sort of melts in and out of the background there, because he's underneath in the shade of that. If I want to then come and, if I was going to add more detail in the umbrella, maybe I want some stripes. So now I will come in with some thicker pigment and just go on top of that. Maybe it sort of disappears as it comes into that light. And all of a sudden I've got something that is tricking you into thinking I did a lot more work than what I did. Okay, who does this? Everybody. I'm just kidding. I know in the idea of building unity and consistency and volume and a feeling of weight in your paintings, this is sort of what I'm going for. But what I'm doing here with the umbrella is the same thing I'll do in whether it's an angled umbrella or an awning, a street awning. But it's that same concept of making sure those lights, those vibrant lights get in there in the first wash, and then they'll be framed in and cut out later. And, it is still, again, even though this is thicker and darker, it is still translucent. And so I'm not getting to the point where this is all cakey. And look, you see this little bit of red glow around here, that just adds to it. But it doesn't look like this. It doesn't look pasted on. It looks like it's part of the scene there. Okay, any thoughts, comments, or questions on that before we move on? Is that understandable?
It is, it looks like it takes a lot of practice to get to that point, but Dan.
Wait, who is that? Who's it?
Oh, this was Connie. I just
Connie.
commented, it's really clear the before and after, and mine tend to be much more like the before.
Right, right.
But
So-
it takes a lot of practice without it looking like just a big hot mess.
It does. And that's the thing, is practice without understanding will become bad habits. So what I really want to express here is, if you can break it down into this way, it's not immediate, but it will start to happen. I can show you older paintings of mine of this kind of thing, even trying to do something simple like this, and it would be a hot mess. But in coming to an understanding of two things. One, I'm always painting my lightest tones working up to the darker tones. So that gives me an order to sort of work in. Two, the idea of controlling what I'm mixing here. So the first wash, it was all about the same, that background establishing green was about the same consistency as this sort of pinkish in here. So that idea of control and sort of intention in what I'm mixing is something to really pay attention to. So if you're just looking for colors to grab to paint, more often than not, you're going to end up with this. But when you are looking at the scene and digesting the scene and saying, okay, there's really light green in here, so I can start with a really light wash of that. So it's not the finish, but it's the start. So if I say, all right, my sky is this, well, I don't know what color that is, but if I come in with green, I'm just coming in with cobalt turquoise. But if this is the lightest thing that I'm seeing in the greens, and then this is sort of the lightest thing of what I'm seeing in the reds, and knowing that color then has to come underneath. This is the abstract version. Starting with that same consistency that comes underneath, and knowing I'm going to want some pink on that person. So then just dropping pink into there to establish that, in a very abstract way, this is what that first wash is. It's all that same consistency. And then I know when I come for my second pass, if I mix something that's thicker than what's here, I will overtake that shape without having it look separate and kind of messed up. So that idea of patience, one, the underpainting, two, the patience, let it dry or use your hair dryer, which I'll do. And I have an understanding that green is a backdrop to all this. So I can just come in and I know I can, frame this in with a much thicker consistency, but it's still not opaque. It's still, still runny. It's just less runny. And then I know I can come in and frame in that shape. Bring in the next pass of my trees. And I know that color has to come underneath, so I can cut in the underneath shape of that. And then when it comes to the figure, I will be a little more careful. I will then cut around the idea of, even though the figure's in shadow, you still need to get some contrast against that background. So I'll leave him cut out, but there's already an undercolor there. So it's not just white paper. And maybe a little bit of water to soften up into him. And then once that dries, I'll know now I can bring in the detail of what I'm looking for with that darkness. And When this dries, it's not going to be anywhere near as dark or as if I come with a really thick consistency now. Oh, I've got to dry this. So, right now that looks dark, but if I come in with this thicker stuff, all of a sudden that's not dark at all when I get something actually dark on top of it. So it's moving with that intention of understanding of what's actually going to be happening when I layer stuff on. And if I'm, consistently layering on top of what's come before, it's always going to be, when I'm building tone on top of tone, it's always just going to be that much darker. And really sort of controlling and exploiting the idea of that thin to thick pigment. And I'll just come in here and I'll say there's a blonde lady. There's her hair there. So, if I was to then negate her hair, which I wouldn't, I know it's not going to be white paper, so I'm still not going to end up with this effect. But it is practice, but it's practice utilizing a sort of idea system to make it come out that way. It doesn't just happen, even if you understand it, which is a bummer, I know. but it's thinking about the process and then applying it, and really, like, this couldn't be an elephant, it couldn't be a car, it couldn't be, so I'm using the setting to define the fact that this is a person. There really isn't a whole lot in there that even says person if I look at it up close, and I think that's another one of the big things that ends up happening is trying to, if you were going to paint this as a painting and trying to make each one of these people do exactly what they're doing there, and being too faithful to the reference. If you don't want to be a photorealistic painter and you're, projecting and then tracing your drawing and then coloring it in, like a very complex adult coloring book. We want to say as much as we can with as little as possible. So that idea of just getting just enough in there to say, this is a person, and will my brain believe me that this is a person? And that really starts, a lot of that starts here. So, it's a multi-level development. There's no shortcut, there's no trick. What I can do is lay out the map of what it takes to get there, and hopefully some useful tips in how to get there.
Dan, this is really helpful. One of the, excuse me, my brain tends to be more literal than I want it to be. And one of the things that I get stuck with when I'm trying to draw or paint cafe scenes are all the empty chairs. And a lot of times they're white plastic. And if you look at your reference photo, they're just all these freaking white legs all over the place. Right. And my brain is telling me that I need to find a way to include them, or at least infer that they're there, and that they're, white sticks and they're so distracting. How do you turn your brain off and decide what to include and what not to include in terms of empty chairs and empty tables?
Okay. So as we come into this next composition section, I'll be illustrating just that. And it's part of the editing and part of the just decision making is, once I get my composition, and I have my reference, I'm going to remove myself so much from the reference, because I'm only going to do what needs to happen for the painting. So, you know, if this guy had another chair, and again, you know, this is small, this is probably like 4x6 or something. But, you know, if there was another chair here and I needed to say, well, maybe he's waiting for his date, you know, maybe I would do something in gouache and sort of put it in there. But this idea of that patterning is not going to come into play, you know, especially in a quarter sheet or probably even a half sheet. But we're going to look at ways to kind of insinuate busyness and suggestion. But in watercolor, it will never be a series of white chairs for me, because it's you can pull that off in oil or acrylic, but in watercolor and in the way that I like to paint, that's going to be something I'm going to avoid like the plague. And I think, let me see if there's a reference photo in here. Not there. Where's the painting? So I did a painting of this scene. I thought I brought it in here. Oh, I think this was the reference of the painting that I did. And, you know, I basically just made those chairs black or dark, you know. So it was losing, not really paying attention to what was happening there. But we'll get a little bit more into that here in just a minute. So it's a really good question. And we're going to address it. We are about halfway through, so we're moving into where I'm going to be doing some more actual painting stuff. So this was just sort of a made up introduction to that idea, but we're going to move into some more practical demonstrations. So why don't we take a break till the bottom of the hour here, and when we come back, I can get some more paper taped up and move into that. Does anyone have another question before we take a short break?
Dan, it's Dana. Sometimes I think I get too dark in the shadow area, too black, too solidly black. Any tips to avoid that?
So the actual thick stuff, like the stuff, because really, you know, any color that is that you're mixing, that's going to be read as like too dark. You're probably using too much of it all over. You know, anytime I come in with that really thick stuff, it's only going to be used in one region. So you know, in this, you know, that shadow is definitely blue, but like under this part here and this stuff here, like that's really thick. And if I used that back here, if I used it over here, if I used it like all around the painting, then that's usually where it runs into that idea. So when we you know, when we move through, let me just turn this way. And, you know, it even goes into the idea of, well, what am I using in my sky? So like if I make the building this tone, and then there's an awning, and there's building underneath it, and I'm putting in a base that's this tone, and then this will be my ground, basically. So let's say this is the ground here. What I notice more often than not, that what happens is not enough complexity first. Okay, so if you just come in with dark and you say, okay, well, I need people and chairs under here, and you come in with the thick stuff on this simple thing, and you say, okay, oh, it's not dry, but it'll be okay. Like, here's a person, here's a table, here's a person, here's a table, here's the stuff underneath. Here's a person, here's a waiter. Right. So you just get this sort of like silhouetted idea that is nowhere near complex enough for what is being said. So we'll spin this way and do it a little bit more of the right way. So I would start out the same, right? So here's my building color, or the wash for my building, and on the gate where the awning is. So this is the building continuing below the awning, and somewhere that's got to hit the ground. So I might just put in a little bit of dark first, just to ground that whole shape. And then here's my ground, my actual ground. Okay, that would be the first wash. Now, before I get into people, I'm gonna have to just dry this for 1 second. And I'll draw in a person just to kind of say they're here. So let's say there's a guy sitting here. There's we'll say there's a waiter here. He's got a partner. There's another table over here. Okay, whatever. All right, so that would be the idea of, who's in this painting. And I'm just going to get this a little closer for a second because it's really small. So, I talk a lot about 2-wash paintings, 3-wash paintings. And the reality of some more complex stuff is I'm going to need to do a little bit more than that. So in this idea of I've established where the building is, I've established the ground. Now I need to establish what's underneath the awning. So I'll start again. And this is still not thick stuff, but it's going to be a little bit darker. Because, if there's no light underneath here. So then I may say, okay, I'm going to start with this wash here. And maybe I'll just leave out a little bit of white for like where the apron might be on this guy. And I'll put in that layer. And then while that's drying, I may drop in a little bit more of a dark underneath the, maybe there's some windows back there. Maybe there's a doorway. There's some other stuff there. And again, the building gets grounded. So I'll drop in those darks there. Straighten that out. So I'm establishing another pattern underneath there, because that all needs to then be underneath the awning, right? So what that's doing is it's already darkening what's there, right? I mean, it's already darkening the people. Okay. Now I'll let that dry. Now I'll come into the idea of putting in those people. And because I've got a more abstract pattern in there, I can find areas to kind of like make that work. And even saying, well, I'm going to keep his apron open. It's not white. It's not white as the paper because there's that first underwash underneath there. So ultimately, if I'm building a wash on top of a wash on top of a wash, I can get away with not getting, I can do stuff on there that isn't even going to be super dark yet, because I'll be layering on top of that. So using this stuff that's here, like this isn't that thick, right? This is kind of, maybe it's like milk. But then if I come in with that milk on top of here and put people, and I can even use visual suggestion, leave part of his shirt out. this guy in over here. So because I'm building on top of that dark, I can get dark without getting too black. So now where I come into that light area, I will get thicker. And I'll connect into that stuff to kind of, make sure I get this thicker business, get his legs there. Get this guy's table and chair there. Maybe he's holding a certain, he'll be right-handed. He's holding a serving tray. So I'm getting more of an interesting assortment in there without having to get too dark. You see how that gets dark, but without having to get thick and cakey? And so you'll say, these guys are out in front. There's a little bit of some shadowing here. Keep a little bit of some light happening back down in there. So it's a little bit more steps than just bing, 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 right? So now that that's there, and I might come in with just a little bit of gouache. And maybe I'll put a little bit of light on the table there and there. But this still isn't like, it's still damp. So when I put in this gouache, it's not going to be white. It'll just be a little bit lighter. I'm going to blend into there a little bit. Okay, so you see how I was able to build that without it just being one tone of dark. And there's nothing on there that's going to dry in that like thick, cakey black way. And it's done in a much more liquidy, fluid way than coming in and, with really heavy dark stuff that's going to end up like dry brushing and looking cakey. Like, where I'm, I can't even get that thick, but that idea of just, well, I'm just going to put darks on top of here and have it just be too consistent of one tone of dark rather than a sort of network of pattern. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
That's helpful, Dan. Thanks.
So what that does, and ultimately it keeps those darks rich and interesting without just getting like black and dark. Okay. And we'll see more of that when we come into this next exercise, or when I do this next little demo thing. So okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, which is now going to be 20 till, and we'll get into some larger examples of not just mini sketch examples. Okay. So if you have a question, just write it down or hang on to it till we get back here. Okay. And it is true what Connie said. It is concepts to clue into and practice. And if you start thinking more in the terms of the approach and process to this, you'll automatically notice a difference in what you're doing, but it will take time to become comfortable in the way of doing that. But coming into these next examples, you'll be able to see a little bit more in real time of like how this, how the concept of this, not just made up, but when we're looking at reference and applying that from our reference. Okay, I'm gonna just pause this. Okay, so I'm just going to recap for a second before we move into part 2 here. In the idea of tackling this kind of subject or approaching this kind of subject, it is really important to develop your library and your way of seeing things, which happens here. So, you don't have to get on a plane and fly to Paris. You can drive to your local Starbucks, sit, or whatever coffee shop, I know it's getting to be winter, so there's less people sitting outside for most of us. If you live somewhere warm, you can still take advantage of that. But, starting to find the gesture and just that basic idea of what people are doing when they're there is going to really help when it comes to do these. Most of the time, the positions of people and the way I'm going to compose is not what's going to happen in the photo. And I kind of do like what's happening in this first reference that I'm going to do too. So this first one that we're going to do is a little bit less confusing by color. So it's a great place to kind of experiment and practice using these kind of tones and techniques to build those shadow areas underneath the thing. But getting in there and doing this will help. The way of sort of, when I do multi-layered paintings, they're layered for a reason. So, it's that idea of overworking a painting usually happens when, more often than not, it happens when you're pulling each aspect of the painting apart and not approaching it as a whole. So you're painting this guy, then you're painting this guy, and then you're doing this, and you do end up with that kind of weak, broken, not connected kind of inclusivity in a painting, like in developing a painting. So the idea of working thin to thick, lightest tones to darkest tones, is what kind of needs to happen. So I'll establish the painting, and then I'll establish the sort of darker section of the painting, and then I'll establish the really dark darks. But those really dark darks are going to cut around certain areas of light. So it's not just always, it's this back and forth of building on top of your lights. And then, basically once you get into the last third of the painting, we're cutting around some of those lights, but it's not white paper anymore. So it gives us this more multi-layered, complex feeling. Okay, so this painting is going to be, well, it is. This is a little street cafe in Venice. In the square, I forget what the name of the square is, but it's right after you go over the, what is the University Bridge? I don't know. Across the way from here is where they have the Vivaldi performances in the church.
Plaza San Marcos?
No, it's a smaller plaza. I'll have to look at a map. Dang it. Anyway, it exists. Okay. So I'll try to get in here where you can see my palette and the reference in the painting. And keep me out of the way. There we go. Okay. Oh, come on. Bear with me. There we are. Okay. And I'm just going to angle this to take the glare off. Okay, so there's the reference. So, it's a fairly interesting reference photo. It's not that bad. But again, if I don't do more to it to tell more of a story, and this is getting into a little bit of that idea of the story of things, of, the communication of things, then, it'll just sort of be a bad reproduction of the photo. So when I can say more, do more with what's going on there, then I can get into a little bit of the idea of creating a piece of artwork. And so I'm going to start with my little notebook here. I'm going to kind of analyze and figure out what's going on here with the painting, or what needs to actually happen. So I'm going to do, it's a thumbnail, but it's a slightly larger thumbnail. And I'm going to, kind of apply it to the size that I'm working. I basically have an 11 by 14 sheet that I've taped in half, which will give me a slightly more vertical. Okay, now there's a couple things going on here. And, even looking at it from this size, there's an idea of the, there is an awning back there. There's an awning that comes out and there's umbrellas. So I'll probably push that separation a little bit to make it less confusing. And I'm not going to get really super involved with what's happening above the awning. So, as it is right now, I'll sort of put my, this kind of comes in this way a little bit, but I'm not going to get too super crazy with the perspective. This will cut across through here. This will then cut across through here. And I will keep it on just a little bit of an angle to make it more interesting. And then that idea of, windows. Keep this on just a little bit of an angle. Now I need to figure out what's actually happening here. So I really like the pose of this waiter here, setting the glasses on the table. And I like the excuse me, the lady in the light. And I like those two birds too. Like it's, we've got this nice kind of composition. So I think the only thing I'll really probably do is I'll move that waiter closer to this, to where the main figure is. So we've got a kind of a table here. And my lady will be here. And, when I'm doing these sort of layout kind of things, again, I'm not really super concerned about doing a great drawing. I just need to understand the composition. So this umbrella will cut through here. And then there's actually rows, these umbrellas kind of go back. And I'm going to bring this waiter, I'll just bring him closer. So I have these two, they're not interacting. He's on the table behind, but it kind of, connects them together. And I do like these little birds, so I'll probably put a couple of those little birds around. And then the stuff going back here, maybe I'll put another table here with the white. And these aren't going to be white, but there are other tables going back there. And I could probably even put another waiter back here in the dark. But he'll be really just kind of masked in there. So it's really just about these two people. This guy's a little bit of an accent. Maybe I'll put another guy back here. But I want to simplify this. He'll be back here at this table, but he'll be more in shadow. And he'll be tucked in there. So that's kind of what I'm going to do with the composition. All right. So what that does is it's going to, by planning it out, deconstructing it, like, I talk about this a lot. Like, I'm not trying to redraw this. I'm trying to reconstruct it. So the idea of, if these chairs were white, right? I mean, as it is, they're light against dark with all of the little sticks and legs here. So in an expressive painting, I can sort of emulate that without having to think about exactly like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 ad nauseum chairs. But I might get a couple little, you know, idea of that, the broken pattern that creates. So they'll sort of be there, but not in the way that they are in reality. And if I think about where, you know, this pattern of shadow of darks, I'm more worried about, you know, creating that sort of idea of that pattern of darks, and that will trick my painting into saying, oh, there'll be a lot of detail there. All right. So look for those patterns. And again, probably the thing that becomes hard is I'm going to look for that pattern, but I'm not going to draw it. I'm going to try to emulate it when I paint this and just make it kind of feel like that. Okay.
So Dan, after you do that sketch, do you go back and refer to the sketch, or do you continue to refer to the reference photo as you're painting?
So I'm gonna be using both. I'll be more concerned about, you know, as I'm doing the drawing, you know, I'll put this, I'll just put it here where I can see it also. But it then, you know, the breakdown and the way I worked through that, I'm gonna do that again. But I've already trained my brain to sort of not look at this, so I'll be looking between the two. But it becomes more of like, I have this information now. So, you know, anytime you draw anything, like when you write yourself a note, you're going to remember that more than just someone telling you, or if you just look at it, you know. So the act of actually doing this has put this into my brain. So I could probably draw this without the photo reference right now, because I've got this, like the shape that's here, the shape that's here, like my brain has cataloged the basic kind of placement of these things, and that's why it's so important to draw from life, is that you absorb it into you. And I'll tell you, my memory is not good. But if I write something or I draw something, I can usually sort of pull into that. So the looking at this probably isn't so much as important as the act of doing it. But when I start to lay this out, if I have a question, I may say, oh, wait, no, I know what I did here, rather than getting too tied up into what I might be looking at in the photo. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right, so here we go. I'm going to start to soften that. I'll bring that to about here. And, you know, as I start to plan this out, you'll see me kind of, you know, especially when it comes to more complex things, I might do less and less drawing at first, and I'm just going to put marks that sort of indicate where things are and where they need to be. So I measure out here. Back here. But, you know, I'm not going to get too crazy. And I will say, everything happening below the umbrellas is way more important than anything happening above. And I've talked to some people about this. The idea of like, you know, in the composition, you may say, oh, Dan, those umbrellas are right in the center of the painting. Well, they are, but the focal point is down here, which is down in the lower third, right? And there's such a dark business here that's going to visually bring that dark center down. So the idea of this being in the center doesn't bother me at all for this particular, in this particular instance.
Hey, Dan, one more question. This is Connie again. Do you
Uh-huh.
ever do value study sketches or paints before you get started with the real painting?
No, and I'll tell you why. So if I look at this, can you instantly tell me where my lightest lights are?
Well, yeah, on that one, definitely.
Okay, and where my darkest darks are, and where the middle tones are. So in the idea of composing, I'm really going to look for three values, more or less. Basically, the lightest lights, the darkest darks, and then the midtones. Anything else, as long as I can maintain that separation of, like value-wise, like the ground and the building are not that different. They're pretty close. The ground might be a hair darker. But then I've got light that comes through here and light in the detail through here, and then this is all dark, and dark in the windows. So, I try to talk people into looking at something with common sense more than, especially in this particular painting, a value study would be pointless. Like I can see it, like there's nothing there that would have to, that's going to trip me up.
Hi, go ahead.
All right.
I can see you teaching.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay. So, depending on the complexity of what I'm looking at, there's no distance, I've got a building there. So it's not like I'm not going to have huge atmospheric depth shifts. So that's why I wouldn't even remotely think about doing a value study with it. And in the way that I control my process, right? So if I know I start with light, start with my lightest lights, and I'm working down to my darkest darks, and I'm starting with thin pigment and working to thick pigment. As I work my way through that, back to front, light to dark, what a value sketch does is it just adds more confusing information that I don't need. So, it's not that there's a way around value sketches, especially with watercolor, that become, I feel, less important. If you really look at what it is you're painting, so yeah, that's about all I got to say about it.
Are you thinking about using the Pink Lady as a center of interest, or
Yeah, the
are you
focal
leaving the Pink Lady?
right there. What's that?
Are you leaving the Pink Lady?
Uh-huh.
She's cute.
I am. So she's going to be right here, and I'll draw her a little bit better now that I know where my stuff is here. And she's got her shoulder down on the table. So that also instantly gives me the idea of where's my table? Where's the height of my table? Well, she's leaning on it. So I'm always going to be using that as a, I'm always going to be measuring and using what I have to find the information. And I'm going to take a phone out. I'm going to have her looking at the menu instead, because that'll tell a nicer story than just the idea of, right, just got some light on her leg there. Right, so that's about enough for the drawing of my lady. And, again, I'm only drawing what I need to see. So, well, Dan, that's not a good drawing. Well, it's accurate. It's accurate to the proportions and to what I need to see. And put a nice idea of this tablecloth here. It's in shadow. That's in shadow. This guy's standing up and he's leaning down. So that means one shoulder down, one shoulder up. And it's nice he's got this apron on, so I really only need to draw his arms, because everything else will sort of merge into the background. And again, I'll put in the idea of a little split raggedy tablecloth. Be a table back there. Shadow. And oh, I was going to put a guy over here, so we'll put another guy dining back here. He'll just be in the shadow zone back there. And I'll continue with the idea of this broken shadow kind of coming down. So I just sort of draw it in a chick 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 kind of way. All right, there's these again, these will be in shadow, but if I want to make sure I have darks against lights, so I'm making sure his whites are not, they're going to be framed in with the darker parts back there. Here, there's just some stuff over there. And then I talked about this other waiter back here. There'll just be a guy back here. Maybe he's a busboy. I don't know. All right, so in a sense, again, with the way that I'm designing this, she's the main point, and then everything else is sort of supporting her. So this coming in here, this coming in here, and it kind of fans out. So I get this sort of V wedge, which is one of the things I'm always going to look for. Okay, maybe there's a little bird here. Maybe there's another bird here. It'll just be little things. Certainly not the importance of the painting. And I don't want to get too involved in what's happening back here. And I want this to look nice, but it's really not about these windows, balconies. Really, this is what the painting's about. So in that idea of if you're doing, the painting is about the cafe scene. It's about what's happening underneath there. And you want to get way too concerned about what's happening up here, you will pull the focus away. So, I was, considering even just leaving that blank. But if you look here, there's an awning that's up, right? Like it's been put up. I may put that in. That may look nice. Like I'll bring the awning out, like it's been unrolled, and that may look cool. Just to have a nice, another light spot up there. And you could see it in here. It's a window awning that's pushed up. All right. Okay, so here we go. That's about all I need for my drawing. And it's really just trying to get what's important in there. And to get to the point that I want to paint, I have to paint through everything else. And I won't approach it any differently than what I normally do. Again, light to dark, big shapes to small shapes, thin pigment to thick pigment. And I'm going to get some clean water here. Does anyone have a question before I get going? Okay, and color wise, you know, this is sort of a pinkish tan. Got more of an ochre through here. I've got these nice light, really light umbrellas, so I'll end up just keeping them, probably just keeping them basically white for the sake of this painting. Same thing with this awning opened up here. I'll probably just keep that white, just to keep things simple. And this isn't a huge, I don't have huge washes. So I'm going to start, this is just a number 12 Isabe squirrel. So it's a soft natural brush. But for this initial lay-in, this is what I'm going to use. So the only thing I'm going to negate, I will negate this awning and this umbrella. And I'm going to negate some of where the idea of some of these white tabletops might be. And I need to fairly keep this main figure negated. But the ones in the background in the first wash, the wash is going to go right through there because he's not white, right? He's in shadow. He's lighter, but he's still in shadow. Okay. Here we go. And again, up here, I'm not super concerned. Might get a little bit of an idea of some of that. Some of that. Excuse me. And I am working on a 45-degree angle. So I'm using that to bring this down through the painting. A little bit more blue into that. Just a little bit. And I'll do more up there, but for now, that's just the first, just need the first wash on there. And now a little bit of this ochre for the but not dark. And I'll frame out these umbrellas. Just some brief color back there. And then this ochre, which you can't see, but it's just another well here with that ochre. I'm just going to bring some ochre up into this stuff here. And I'm going to start to put in, and again, the only white I'm going to leave is on the front of the umbrella. And I could just bring that right through everything that's not going to be white can just get a pass of that. And I'm just going to start to leave a couple little highlights. Oh, that table I'll leave white. These two tables I'll leave white. Back here I can start to do that. And I'm just going to leave that as it is for now. It's just a base wash. And now I'll get in more of this ground here, which comes back to a little bit of a pinkish, bluish gray. I want it too pink. I want it neutral. Pour a little bit of yellow ochre into that. It's almost like a really pale, weird purple. A little more blue. There we go. But again, it's pretty thin. There's not too much going on there. But I do want it to, I'm going to want these shadow shapes to read on it. So I don't want to go too dark. I want to keep some feeling of light on the ground there. And I'm just going to build that up just slightly as it comes forward. But again, it's not a super distant piece. I don't need a ton of lead in there. So it's just a little bit darker as it comes forward. And that would be the first establishing kind of wash. So I've left some lights and some whites here, but they're not going to stick around forever. But I do know that those are going to be reserved here, here, and here. And if I think about what's happening with color, you know, it's all pretty neutral. So the only thing I'm really cluing into is slightly yellow, slightly purple. You know, so if I think about complements, yellow and purple, okay, those work great together. So you know, I'm not really getting crazy with the idea of what's happening with color. But I'm keeping it very simple in the palette. Okay, so we'll just let that dry. And you know, this is fairly weak. So and if I look at the photo, like I know I'm gonna have this strong dark in here. So if I start too dark, this dark is gonna have to get really dark. So by starting, you know, establishing with this, you know, I want a feeling of light on this other stuff. So I definitely don't want to go, you know, dark with that. I want a nice light sort of feeling of translucency. Okay, I'm just going to blow dry this to make sure it's dry. And that's the other thing, always, you know, after that first wash goes, be patient, let it dry, or make sure it's dry. Okay. And, you know, again, the main thing to remember to tell yourself, excuse me, you know, this could be the cafe at Costco. I don't know. It would be the same, any kind of outdoor cafe. It doesn't matter if it's Venice or wherever. I'm going to sort of approach it in this same way. And this is exactly how I started this painting. It was started in this exact way of first establishing the main field. So we've got this, everything, you know, there was a wash through everything, you know, the same way we did that red in that first example. I dumped that red in while it was still wet. But that's, you know, this starts exactly like this. Where'd it go? There we are. Okay. Okay, so again, now I'll start at the top and work my way down. And I'm going to simplify this. I'm not doing anything too nuts. I'm going to keep this really brief. And get a little bit of green, a little bit of purple. And you know, but again, I'm wanting to put the feeling of light in through all of this. So I'll start with I'll just simplify and just put one simple shadow shape. Maybe I'll come with this dark and I'll just put in an idea of dark up here. When it comes to the idea of flowers, flower pots, those aren't part of my painting. I'm not interested. They don't need to be in there. That dark underneath here. Just making marks with the brush. And come in with this other guy. This is synthetic. So I can be a little more precise. And if there's an edge to this window, drop in a little bit more dark there. Drop in a little bit more dark there. And again, I don't want to get too interesting down here. Like it needs to be brief because everything is coming down here that you're supposed to look at. This will be something for the shadow. So I'll bring more of this guy is casting a shadow over here. This balcony will be casting a shadow and framing in this awning. This guy's casting shadow here. And this, there's nothing that's going to be anywhere nearly as dark as what's going to happen down there. Brief, it's the edge. And then I'll probably put a cast shadow coming across here from something off, excuse me, geez. Something off camera. There we go. So that's something over there, throwing the light this way. And while that's wet, if I need to drop in, if I want to drop in just a little bit of more dark, I'll do that. So this is, it's always exploiting what I can while things are still wet. That never changes. With subject, it's always going to happen that way. So this is still wet, and I want to darken where that window is a little bit more. Just stuck my hand over here, so I'm gonna do some more in there. Okay, now I'll be I'll just dry brush in a little bit of the idea of this, not dry brush, but I'm putting in the idea of this balcony thing. I'm going to do it just very briefly. Keep it loose and sketchy. Yeah, the painting isn't about what's happening up there, but that'll give me just enough of an idea of a iron railing of some sort up there. Okay, and you know, it is. Do want it to look nice, you know, that has to do something up there. I just don't want it to do too much. But I also don't want to have to come back to it. So once it's done up here, it'll be done. And this is really thick stuff to put in some nice dark shadow accents. Little dry brush. It's there. And that's probably fine. Okay, so that's all I'll do at the top. That's about it. But I'm sort of, you know, working that back section. So that's like the equivalent of working the background. Because, you know, this awning comes out, this is underneath. So this is actually the furthest thing back. And now that that's done, now I'll continue to move down. And this dark connects through. Separates the awning there. And, you know, if you just look at that, like, oh, it's done. Okay, great. Okay. All right, another little bit of shadow, not much shadow, just a secondary line where these awnings would roll up into. That. And continuing to work my way down. I'm gonna just grab a little bit of burnt sienna and warm this up a little bit. So the idea of where the shadow is on the these umbrellas in the front. And there's another one back there, but I'm not going to put it. I'll just keep that there. And to keep the focus here, I'm going to just take some water and frame in. So I'm just putting a little bit back there to have that run in, just to get rid of the paper on this guy in the front. So the main light stays right on the front there. So it's putting that in and then just softening it to where this sort of just runs into. Because I don't want it to be too dark. I just want it to be there just enough. Okay, now we're getting into the meat of the painting. So once all that is established, now is the time to start this shadow shape underneath. Actually, I'm gonna put just a little bit of blue in there. Okay. Okay, so again, I'm going to start with, you know, building this up and working my way into what's actually happening. And it needs to be complex. It needs to feel like it's underneath there. It's all back in shadow. And it needs to make sense. It needs to be complicated, but, you know, busy. And trying to paint exactly what's happening down here will not help me. It will, excuse me. It'll end up just getting, you know, if I try to copy that, I'll lose the painting. But the same way I didn't try to copy this, I just sort of emulated what was there just enough to make it say, you know what, there's something happening over here. It's that same idea of I need to do just enough, but do it for the painting, not do it for what I'm looking at. Okay, so here we go. There's a little bit of. So I'm going to start thin. You know, I've already got this glaze here, so I don't have to get too dark yet. I'm going to start just reestablishing this part underneath here. And I can start with the edge of this umbrella. And again, I'm going to work my way down. So I'm going to start there. And I'll start to bring in some. But this won't be the end of it. It's going to be the more of the beginning of it. This waiter I can completely negate first. He's further back. This guy's a little bit closer, so I am going to negate him, and I'm not going to negate my lady here. And as these tables go back, but I can put in the dark underneath him here. Oh, I got a bad batch of paper. I can negate him. And the idea of that patterning and starting to pop around to start to create a semblance of a pattern. And again, this is just the very beginning of it. Okay. All right, now I'm just going to go in and start to build the darks. And once I've negated things, ideally I want to grab this before it starts to get too dry. And I have some wonky paper here that is not wanting to cooperate. So generally speaking, I would do this before it's dry, but you know, I would let it set up a little bit and then start, because I want this all to be soft edged in here, but without you know, the reason I was a little bit more careful about negating some stuff is I want it to blend in to each other. So this guy's dark, he can go right through him. And now any lights I leave are already half-toned compared to anything else. So this guy. So in that idea of a tonal study, I'm controlling my tones as I go through. So this guy that's back here, he's already going to be a step lighter than what's here. This guy's going to be dark. Tie him right in. So anything that I leave light now is not going to be white. It's going to be like a secondary light back there. Okay, so you see that starting to pull together. And I haven't gone anywhere near real dark yet. So now I will come in with some really thick stuff, and that hopefully will stay wet this time. So this is much darker, but if this is wet, when I put this dark in, it's still not going to get anywhere near as dark as what it would be if it was dry paper. And if I negate, I'll need to be a little more careful with what I'm negating now, or the way I'm negating. Might pull some of that back out. Pull some of that back out. Okay. So it becomes a real dance, a real back and forth dance. And when I'm treating the whole shape as an alive, connected situation, anything I drop in is it just goes. It's the whole shape gets connected and altered as we're working through here. Let's see, dark. And drop some more dark into that guy. Just make sure he melts in. And at this stage, I probably need to come in and I'll use a little bit of red and a little bit of green, because these guys are going to be flesh tone, but they're not in bright sunlight. So put in the idea of his face. Let that sit for a minute. And get some back there. He's going to end up being dark anyway, but okay. This is going to be very, very thick stuff. Pretty much pure pigment. And nice and dark. Burnt sienna and the cobalt turquoise and a little bit of red. And I'll put in a little dark spot for the waiter's hair and the top part of his apron. And look how white that looks, but it's not. It's that undercolor. But by the time I finish, these whites will really pop, and that will be, that's all going to be still a toned down. Get his little tie. Tuck in this table nicely. And I'll just come through and bop in some more of these darks. But we're not getting into the actual shadow shape yet. All right, what else can I do while this is still active? So I'm gonna get darker down here. I'll get some blue, French ultramarine. You know, when it comes to colors, you know, if you look at how I'm working in my palette, I'm just looking for darks and different consistencies. And is it, you know, a warm color or a cool color? So I wanted this to be, you know, bluer down in the shadow. So I'm grabbing some of this and some of this blue and making sure it just stays in the realm of blue. And I'm still not too dark, so I can still get my figure back there. Okay. And I guess I'll get my base tones of this figure first. So just a little bit of yellow ochre. A little bit of burnt sienna. And a little bit of red. And again, she's human, so I want to keep her translucent. I don't want her to get too dark and heavy. So this will be a fairly pale wash first. I'm going to cut out my menu. And the same way I did other stuff, I'm just dropping in where those light tones are going to be. I'm going to cut them back out after. But for now, I'm going to just sort of blanket that in there. There will be shadow cut into that, but I need to kind of establish my light tones first with her. So she's kind of naked sitting there at the moment. And while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'll just come in and put a little bit of some shadow ideas on these tablecloths. Push that. Oh well. There we go. Okay, so I think this is dry enough to get this guy in here now. He's gonna be fairly opaque. Basically just he just needs to be shadowy back there. So I'm just kind of mixing up the dark. And this still isn't going to be super, super dark. And I'll leave the idea of what was there for his shirt and just put in his apron. And he's going to just melt right back into he's just going to melt right back into that background there. And I think before I get this guy in, I'm going to have to make sure that's all dry. But I am going to put another guy back here. And actually, I could just put him here in this light area. There he is. And I can just cut around that and leave kind of an idea of a shirt. And it's framed in with that dark. So it ends up, you know, being light back there, but it's just, you know, cutting around the light that was left. Okay. And if I want him to be just a little bit more human, I could. This is just a little bit of, I'm gonna just drop a little bit of warmth into where his face would be. And it just makes him feel a little more human than there. You know, put his hand on the table here. Probably get a little bit warmer in this guy's face too. There we go. And we got to deal with our naked girl here. But I need to make sure things are dry. So in the meantime, I think, so I need to let this dry now. So now I'll revisit and rethink stuff. And all right, maybe I will do this a little more interesting up here. Like maybe I'll take some nice cobalt turquoise and make this into a striped awning. But that's definitely not the kind of thing I care about until I have time. And maybe I'll do that on here too, just to give it a little bit more color. Frame this stuff in a little bit more. Oh. This is just very, very light. It's like a glaze. But give a little bit more color to a dreary kind of thing. It's funny because things were drying so fast and now it's not drying at all. So I'm going to blow dry this again real quick. Yep. Oh, hello? Somebody say something? No? Okay. Okay, that should be fairly dry now. So we'll deal with our lady. So, you know, in the idea of I'm building light to dark, first overall establishing my lightest tones, I didn't want her to get dirty. So in the idea of now I've established the light in her, and now we'll establish more of the dark and get her kind of more clothed and tied in here. So sometimes I need to adjust the way things might be happening to make sure that they will make sense and read properly. This leg will be dark here. And, you know, I'm really just cutting in, you know, the same way we did this, that guy under the umbrella. I've put that established tone, and now I'm just cutting in, and I'm gonna cut out and leave the lights. And I put in that mid-tone, and then I might soften things. Just soften this a little bit. And now I'll get in the darks of her dress. I don't want her sitting there in her all together. And that will melt right into underneath her dress, and the table will connect in there. And I can also tie in the rest of these shadows now. And I'll probably give her like a sun hat. I think that'll read better as a nice big hat on. So I don't have to worry about hair either. So we'll get rid of that. Now a little bit of gouache. I lost the corner of the menu. No big deal. A little bit of light on the brim. And he's not in sun, but I want to bring some light there. There we go. So from that pound of flesh, that's what she becomes. Or the mound of flesh that was there. Okay, now if I am concerned, which I'm not, but if I want a little bit more light on the idea of maybe there's some more chairs back here, I can cut into where some of these, I left this pattern, but there are some natural sort of places there where I can put some lights and darks. I like that guy all melding back in there, but maybe stuff there. And these little birds. They're just little things. And I would probably do some just a little bit of probably a little bit of June Brune number 2 or number 1. and a little bit of gouache, just a little bit in the tips here, and put in a couple little interior lights that are happening back in the restaurant there. The shape of her hat just a little bit. And let's give her a champagne flute. This guy's got a little rocks glass. And again, just to, I've thrown more of a shadow there. So if I want to push the light on here just a little bit more, maybe I will glaze in an angle on this. And keep that light just on the front triangle. There we go. And maybe just a little bit more dark. And that'll do it for this guy. Okay, so that sort of systematic work breakthrough and approach, and the idea of what's happening here of just trying to find a little bit of a confusing pattern, but ultimately, I want this to look better here. This is, this area here is more important than anything else. But that sort of build up and build up and build up. But I'm only working in this area, so it's, the painting is established, and when it comes to that area, by building up in that way, this is dark back here, but it's still very translucent, and it's nowhere near as dark as what's up in front of here. So if I was going to put, well, I guess I didn't put in any of the idea of holes, and if I come in with a really dark, you'll see again the difference of what something that's actually dark will look like on top of this. Another one back here. See that over here. There we go. Okay. So you see how not dark that is when you put like a real dark on top of it. And the mistake is to go too dark too soon. And half the time I'm dropping these really dark stuff into paper that's still damp. So that water in the paper is going to make it not as dark as it would be as if I was on dry paper. And I could maybe, I probably won't, but I think we're okay. Yeah. Okay. Questions? Anybody still here?
Hi.
What were you
Oh.
just considering putting a shadow on the foreground?
I was. So here's the issue is, once I get these guys in here, if I'm going to put in another shadow, I stand the risk of reactivating this guy, and I'm debating on if it's worth it or not. But I think it is, because I think, because I put this light being cast over here, maybe I would want to kind of frame. Let me see what happens. I'll just do it. But yes, it was. And I'll definitely do that bluer to contrast with the sort of yellows and purples. I think I want to do it a little bit bluer. And but I'm not going to do it too dark. I'm going to keep it almost like a glaze. But this is so light that if I go too heavy with it, it'll look really bad anyway. So let's see, that's a test. Okay, you can skirt him. Okay, that's better. Yeah, I like that. Not too clean. Okay, what do you think? Is that better? So I went really blue because this is already sort of a pinkish whatever, that it's going to turn it into a more purple when I glaze. So that was why I went as blue as I did on it, because I knew it would turn a little bit more purple.
Is that going to dry pretty light?
I mean it'll dry about what's there. So but again, wanting to keep that dark through there, I don't want the shadow to be too dark. Same thing up here with the shadow up there, it's really not that dark. So because the ground is so light, I want to keep the dark path right through the middle. There we go. So in the idea of I want to paint this, or I want to paint a scene like this, and Connie made the great point earlier of well, I think that takes a lot of practice. So if you just sort of like even if you just sort of make a square and kind of crop it like this and work on that kind of idea of the center, rather than waiting until you get through a whole painting and then like screwing up your figures, so like doing some vignetted figure work, like even if you just sort of take the idea of this and try to figure out that, because the rest of what I'm doing here is it's what I will do in a landscape or a boat scene or a city scene. There's really no difference in technique. I'm always starting with the furthest thing and working my way forward, starting with the lightest tones and then working to my darkest tones. And really trying to be conscious of only using those darks like right where I need them. So everything else is in shadow and it's dark, but it's not overly dark. And seeing that blue in there too, I might even, let me just see something. Yeah, I'm gonna push that back just a little bit more. I'm just glazing over that. Just pushing that back just a hair more. And I know I already put some gouache in there, but it's okay. There we go. That'll be subtle, but it'll make it that much more. Okay, so that's kind of what we end up with there from this reference. And in the idea of wanting to talk about the shadow and building up those darks in that area, if I was painting this on location or for myself, I would probably do more up in here. But I'm really just interested more about what's happening in here. Now, this is a sketch I was working on earlier, just a little warm up. And I left it at a particular point before I finish up the sort of figure area. So this is out in, well, it's actually just inland from here. This is in Padova. But you can see where these figures are. There's like 2 layers already from this background stuff that's happening on them. So I'm going to work through them and we'll wrap up this piece. But any other thoughts or questions on what's happening here before we move to this other guy?
What happens if you've got like cars in front of everything?
Well,
Do you paint the cars or you don't paint the cars? Are they part of the thing or are they not part of the thing?
it's only part of the thing if it's part of your it's part of your design. So if there was a car parked right here, I would
Yeah, no,
remove
not
it,
so much. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in the idea, I don't think I brought in any reference that has obstructions. Oh, so this is what I was going to do. This is so Steph is in Paris, or she's in Lyon this week, and I'm very jealous that I'm not there. But apparently, and I never knew this, and I don't know if it's just Lyon, but from November 1st on through the winter, they can't have any outside tables. So, because I was like, oh, get me some good cafe reference. And so she sent me this picture and she said, oh my God, I can't believe it. After November 1st, they can't have tables outside in Lyon. So I was going to do a thing with inventing this whole thing, but it's the same thing as these people have nothing to do with why I would want to paint this. So if they were a car or they were people, I just wouldn't put them in there. And if I was going to, I could put this exact scene right in front of here and it would be, not just an empty storefront kind of scene. This was the reference from this other picture that I'm, the other sketch that I'm doing, but I'm trying to see if there's one with obstruction. Okay, so the idea of this this scene here. That's a good question, Angie, because that's where the editing comes into play. So what is the painting about? So right now, this would be just about this piazza, and there happens to be some cafes back there, but it's really more about the people in the scene. Now, if I was going to paint this and want to make this more about a cafe, I would get rid of this pole, and I would probably zoom in somewhere around here. And these people wouldn't be in here. There would be only action happening at the cafe. So, in that idea of, well, what is this painting about? What am I trying to say with this? And I'm going to put a couple of these extra reference pictures up into the where the video lives, where we found the Zoom link. So like this is an easier version of this, but these people would be ridiculous. Why would you put them in? What are they doing? It's about this guy reading in front of the cafe. So I would just negate them and keep this guy and his partner here, the subject, right? So, that idea of making decisions for what goes in your painting. This painting here, or this reference photo. So I paint here. This is where a spot I paint plein air fairly often. And it's just downtown Denver. But in the idea of how would I paint that, or what would I do to design that?
We have a place where they're having a little plein air event close to where I live, and it looks a lot like that one.
Oh, yeah? Yeah.
Yeah, looking down the street, but the roof lines are interesting. They're like little peaked roofs, a series of them.
Nice.
So that's next weekend. So I think I have to practice.
Well, fun. So in that kind of idea of, this is a photograph. This is just, it's just reference. It's reference for me to work with. I like the shapes. I like the color. I like that guy lets me know how tall things are. But this is not a painting. If I was going to paint this, I'm going to reconstruct what's there. So I'll probably bring my horizon line down to here. And I'll think about where that sidewalk is cutting out. So it's about here, and it's kind of cutting out this way. I'm standing up on the curb, so I'm getting a down view. So that idea of changing my eye line is, this guy is really like, these guys are lower than if the horizon was tilted down. So, I'm kind of like looking up this way. So in the redesigning of that, I'll use this guy as my main. He's what I'm going to judge
For scale?
for scale. So once I have my basic, the basic gist of where things are, and let's say this guy's coming down the street, and his shadow's coming out at us, and I probably wouldn't give him long hair, but it's winter, so I'll put his hands in his pockets. He doesn't want to get chilly. All right. So once I, and basically, if you, this is the whole painting. So the whole painting revolves around the intersection and the connection of him kind of connecting this. And this is another one that doesn't really have a whole lot of background. So from there, I would start to design and say, okay, well, this railing thing, unfortunately, a lot of our cafes have that. We've got a lot of homeless stuff happening here. So, if this guy was, like sitting on the same plane, I would probably had this guy sitting, his head would probably be about here. And he's got a little table here. And that's throwing shadows this way too. And then if I think about where the awning is, I would probably bring it about here. And I like seeing underneath the awning. So if I can see underneath that awning, that's going to give me some really interesting things I can do with the way the light is. And I could close this up here, get this nice dark. So, I'm almost designing, backwards. So I'm designing my interaction, my focal point here. This guy almost looks like he's looking over this way, like, oh, hey, Bob, you on your coffee break? We could turn his head that way, give him a hat. So he's saying, what's up when he's walking by? And he's saying, hey, what's up, man?
What's up, man? It's that kind of area too.
All right, so from there, now these cars are really closed in. They don't do anything for me. So maybe I'll frame in here with a car. And, it's got to make sense to where, but, this car is parked along the curb here. And maybe there's another car back here. And if there was again, the little center line in the road is coming there. And Perhaps I would put a car back. Maybe here. And it's the oh. So he's on that side of the road, but his shadow's coming out also. And then the idea of these buildings, it wouldn't even really matter. You know, I mean, I probably wouldn't put this, it just looks weird, you know. So maybe I would put a little bit of an overhang on the building here. And, you know, I know this area, so I know this street is going down this way. And then these buildings are coming up this way. And I would probably just backlight the crap out of this whole thing because the light's coming towards me anyway. So in that idea of, well, how am I going to get a painting out of this? Well, I'm going to start with, you know, and again, you know, well, how can I just draw this guy? Well, because I've drawn people just sitting here before, you know, and I would probably do something like that. So that idea of where am I putting people? Okay, these people are here, but they're not doing anything. Like here, they're sort of interacting. And, you know, these cars, they really just close off that thing. And I'd rather have a little bit of a lead in there. So, you know, by doing that, I can get that lead in. And then looking at these shadow shapes here, I can get more of the idea of, you know, perspective. So all these perspective lines.
Bring it back to the two guys flirting or whatever they're doing.
Right. So, you know, that's all, like, this is all pointing you over here.
Right.
All leading you in. And even this building in the back would basically point you down. And, you know, this idea of this nice, you know, this nice orange here would be such a strong color note there that that's sort of probably about what I would do for working into that painting. And that comes from the idea of, again, you know, everything I do, and I know you're sick of hearing this. Anyone want to say what I'm going to say? It's a rule of thirds. So if I've got
I noticed that.
Where the thirds are, this is anchored here, so everything is supporting into that pocket in where this third would be. Same thing in this guy. Rule of thirds. This is really where I want you to look. It's right here in this third. And, you know, even in the idea of, you know, supporting that. So, you know, bringing this angle, you know, I know these are angled this way. But there should be just, I taped over it, but, you know, there's just enough to kind of bring you back into this way. So, you know, just overall thinking about how your eye moves through. So that's why I'm going to make decisions. So when it comes to that idea of white chairs, you know, oh, there's 1,000 white chairs in here. Where am I going to put them? Well, you know, the idea of these tablecloths here, these, you know, like these white tablecloths, and like those are more interesting to me than trying to think about keeping these little ticks of white in the chair. Or this menu sandwich board, you know, so I'd probably bring that over. You know, the idea of this, I'm really more just interested in sort of an abstract feeling of patterning that goes back there. And your brain will fill in the blanks. Something like this, right? So these two chairs facing would totally ruin the idea of this nice white tablecloth on the front there. That would be just a really nice bright anchor spot. So I would just, you know, I would consider, what is that doing for me in the painting, and do I need it? So these chairs out of there. These people, again, on the edge, they were on the edge of this other photo. They walked through. Like these menaces, they would be not in my painting. Oh, same thing with the, okay, this is a good example. So this painting here, And I think this is the same place, but the type of chair, the color of chair, none of that matters to me. In the idea of, all right, this is probably pretty close to the reference photo. I mean, it was plein air, but I took a bunch of photos. But if we look at that and then compare it to how this is designed. So it's designed with the shadow shapes. It's designed with the balance of lights and darks and warms and cools. And that doesn't, so that when it comes to that idea of I'm going to paint this photo, that deconstructing, that working through it is how the painting gets designed. And it's you really, the next painting that you want to do, whether it's from your photo reference or from from mine or whatever reference you're working from, when you think about not drawing the photo and breaking it down and deconstructing it and replanning for this is really complex. I almost had a nervous breakdown doing this plein air. But well, okay, the umbrellas are there, the arch is there, and beyond that, it's just looking at those patterns. So in the same way of this, like I'm really just thinking about, whereas this is all dark back here, but there's a darker than the midtone, there's a light, there's a dark, there's a light, there's a dark. This guy is against the light. This guy is light against the dark. This guy's just sort of dark against less dark, but he's just meant to be sort of back there. And this lady is, light. She's out in the sunlight. And this guy actually reads lighter than I wanted him to, but it's okay. It really becomes more about, he's probably leaning in, getting her order. So, considering those things and, attacking it through with a system and systematically, and doing everything you possibly can to not do this. Like this is the thing that kills me the most. And when you're trying to say this, but it comes out like this, it really has to do with trying to finish the painting early, right? So it was a real hard for me to break this habit of laying something down and then I'm like, oh, I got to paint it now. I got to come back and paint this thing. Like, and in that idea of building and building, but how do you keep it from getting overworked? Well, because I'm systematically working from the background to the foreground, and I'm only going to get as dark as I need to contrast what's then back there, and it will be done when I get these figures in here. Like that will be the end of the painting. It's just a sketch, but that will be sort of the end of what I would really need to do. So same thing with this. The idea of coming back and putting in that shadow, that really just made it a little bit more interesting. But I wouldn't then say, okay, well, that's all done now. Let me come in and put flowers up here, or let me come in and do the shutters in here, or, like none of that would have all had to be planned for in the overall feeling of the painting. And, so, when you go back and watch this and work through the stuff or take notes or whatever, I can't tell you how important it is to get one of these. And this is a small one. This is only like, I don't know, 6 by 8. So this actually fits in my back pocket. It won't fit in everybody's back pockets, but this and a pencil. I'll go get my coffee. If there's somebody sitting there interesting, I'll just sit down and do a quick doodle. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel or spend a ton of time. But this was in front of Huskins on Balboa Island. So this was one of the last days I was there, October 22nd. And you know, just this idea of, you know, that's obviously not a 3-torso person. They're just overlaid sketches, but the looking and the training, the more you can try to capture a little bit of that pose, a little bit of that. And if you notice, you know, most of what's happening in these are above the table. So, you know, that's kind of why I draw a lot of head and shoulders. So in the idea of this, like this guy with head and shoulders. So just that sort of natural kind of pose, you know, is I could just, let me just throw this guy in here. So like, you know, the idea of this guy in the background here, over here. Sorry, it's backwards. This guy over here, you know, that's just from the experience of, all right, if I'm kind of slouched, my head's kind of down and my arms kind of out, like, and I'm kind of like, you know, I mean, I'm not in a chair, but if I was, you know, but it feels natural and it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like I tried to over render it, because I didn't, but he's just like chilling back there, you know? And in the idea of this guy was in the reference, and so was she, but you know, I want to paint them and make them fit into this world. And if I try too hard to bring what's in, you know, our actual world in there, it won't support what I'm, you know, really doing. And, you know, there's tons of people back there, but, you know, for the idea of, all right, you know, his shoulders come this way, he's putting something on the table. His shoulders come this way, he's putting something on the table. You know, she's kind of leaned, you know, I've kind of reversed her lean, but I also, you know, I wanted to put that menu in her hand, or the idea of her, you know, kind of looking, pointing at the menu. But it's you know, a little bit of, for those of you who can draw, you know, the idea of a little bit of simplification when it comes into the painting, like complicate something that's simpler, and you'll end up with something that feels more complicated than if you poorly do something complicated with the intention of making it complicated.
That was so simple to understand.
Right. Keep it simple, silly, and then complicate it, you know. But the idea of thinking about the approach, thinking about laying in, you know, if it's not white, it's okay to have a tone over it. So, you know, and as we build up those tones, we can make things darker without getting black and cakey, like we were talking with Dana. So, you know, this is like, you know, black silhouettes on something that isn't complex enough. And, you know, this is not black silhouettes on top of something complex, and it reads much more, you know, it creates more interest. It keeps them from just being, because they can't just be silhouettes, you know, they can't just be black figures back there. But it's you know, it's being careful to think about how you're going to work through that, and it's always a back to front. And you know, when you go back and watch this and watch how some of these darks were dropped into that pigment that was still wet, so it gives me soft edges, it gives me more complexity. I could probably still go in here and build some more things, but I wouldn't normally. You know, maybe there's a little sign on the thing here. You know, maybe there's a little thing back there. I don't know. Just, you know, random pieces of dancing around and not worrying about the idea of like, well, is it there? Is it actually happening? You know, so playing within that shape. And it becomes a lot of fun. It becomes It builds interesting things. This is just a little bit of lavender. Sometimes I'll dance a little lavender around just to kind of bring some cools into there. Yeah, that looks cool. I like it.
Dan, I was gonna this is Connie again. I was gonna ask you how you know when you're done, and it looks like the answer is you don't.
Oh, well, so, ultimately, like once I did these birds, I should have been done. So, as I'm working through, right? So like I'm establishing things first. And then in this particular case, this is kind of separate. So I finished that and, but I'll choose my level of finish. Like I'll know, the idea of choosing what you want your painting to look like. And for me, all I know is that this area here needs to be more important. So I need things over here, I need things up here, but this is way more rendered than the idea of what's happening up here, because I want that to be a supporting actor. These are the main actors, these are extras. So I'm always going to give way less attention to anything else happening around the painting. And once I've decided on, if we look at this guy here, like I would spend, my time making sure this looks good, and the rest can just be kind of, happenstance almost, but not, because I still need to think about tone. I need to think about light, but I'm not going to put in, 40 windows here. I'm not going to put in stuff that's going to detract from this, because all of this is just to support the idea of this. So, ultimately, if you're working from back to front, largest shapes down to the smallest shapes, by the time you hit anything that you're actually doing little detail stuff on, you should be done. If you start looking too much, like I'm like, oh, maybe I could put a light in here, or maybe I could put a lamppost, or maybe I could do that stuff. Like I will need to be really careful and think about it. And I would definitely not do it right away. I would probably wait a day or two and say, does it need it? So, when you get to a point that you are technically think you're finished, if you still want to paint, do something else. It's much better to walk away and do something else than to then overwork and pound away at what's happening in your paint, in the painting. So. Yeah. Anybody have a question? Okay.
Yeah, you've given us a lot to think about.
Okay. Well, good. And I hope you can have fun playing with it and experimenting. And are you leaving? Are you leaving? Oh, okay. Sorry. My buddy Dennis. In the idea of if some of these concepts are new, or if we've hit on things that are a lot, take it piece by piece and give yourself time. Like the things I talk about and the things I've done, that it's not like I can just do them. They took work. It's like anything. Is anybody here playing a music instrument? Did you
Play
just
video games.
I know you do. I know you do.
But that takes a lot of work,
Right. So how many times do you die on your first run through? Like,
oh my goodness.
yeah.
I still die.
Right. Like I have a harmonica, I blow in it sometimes. I don't know music theory or like what I'm doing with it. I can't play harmonica like I can paint, but I also don't give it that much time, So, in the idea of, if I can shift your thinking or turn you on to some different approaches or ways of looking at things, that's the important thing. But you have to understand unless you're in, some kind of ingenue or It takes as much time as it did for you to be able to run your business or retire or anything else you've achieved in life. Did you just do it once, or did you who's ever been to marriage counseling? I don't know. So those things.
There's the old joke of how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice,
Right.
practice.
Right. It's true. But the difference is like when you do things like this, or if I'm not gonna steer you in some weird way. Like most of the stuff that I talk about is actually like, it's more theory based and not just, oh, just take your brush and do this. It's not that at all. It's that can be fun on top of the things, but the way that I try to approach things is more like, I'm not really doing tricks. I'm working in this way of like, I've got these things set up, I'm working through it. So when I say I work light to dark, I do. Or when I say big shapes to small shapes, I do. When I say I'm going to establish a tone over this whole painting, I am, because that's what's going to take me then to, well, what's next? Next, I'm going to put in these little fancy things, and then I'm going to put in these figures, so it becomes this way of working through. And I'm not saying you have to do it the way I do it, but you should think about it at least as much as I think about it. And which is, each painting will introduce a new set of questions for you. So each time you want to paint something, there's going to be problem solving, and watercolor especially it's 100% problem solving. And those problems really need to be solved before you are somewhere in the middle and you're just like out in the middle of the ocean, like, shit, I should have brought a life jacket or a radio, I don't know, something. It's like you don't go skydiving without your parachute. Maybe, I think they call that suicide. But the idea of breaking it down, and especially in complex scenes, like well, if we look at like the full, the zoomed in version of what's actually happening here. So if I'm doing a giant, like a large painting, I'm going to need more information. But in doing something like this size, I'm going to edit it down into, well, what's important here? Well, I like the waiter and I like the lady sitting there, and I'm going to make them doing something. And if I could sneak in another figure or two, I'll do that. But it's like, simplifying, setting myself up for success. And if that's going well and I can sneak in another figure, maybe I will. But it will be the kind of thing where I'm actually sneaking him in. So these 4 figures were essentially planned for, right from the get-go, where, but if, I could probably sneak another ghosty figure into that main doorway of a waiter that's kind of coming out, and it won't detract from my focal point, because he's going to be way back, he would be basically like this guy is just kind of melted in back there. And I could probably find a way to melt a guy coming out here carrying a tray of food or something. But
it sounds like you're saying that unless it serves the main purpose of the painting, why bother doing it? It might just detract.
Right. So when you first look at your reference, or you're first looking at your scene, try to distill it down into that idea of, okay, what do I want to look at in this? What do I want to direct people to look at? So, in the idea of this little, like working through this quick kind of layout sketch, it really, it's really kind of designing around where I want you to look first, and then everything else works to support it. And that can be done very simply, or it can be done in a very, complicated way. But until it becomes easy, keeping it like simple, you'll still get really good looking paintings, The so this painting was all made up essentially. But like the idea of what's happening here, like that's not photo reference. Like I had the idea of how I wanted this guy to look, and I did look at horse reference, but I drew it thinking about I want you to be kind of looking up at him. And then I'm with this other guy back here. Well, he's just to kind of balance out and tell more of a story that these guys are kind of, you know, going on the trail. And then the idea of the sky angling this way, the ground angling this way, you know, it's all just designed to kind of do that. But it started with this guy, you know, and I think this will sound a little funny, but in the movement of plein air painting and the idea of going out to paint and doing that, there's, you know, an element of that originally is like sort of pre-camera. So you're going out to paint to gather reference to then come back in the studio with. You're absorbing what's there, you're learning about colors, you're seeing that stuff. And it was basically like using your photos, but now we have photos, you know, so we just take photos and we think, well, we're just going to paint them. So there's a little bit, this is where I don't mean it to sound shitty, but it will sound really shitty. There's a little bit of a lack of creativity in the thinking of what I'm going to paint. So yeah, I paint from photos all the time, but I'm going to want to invent some aspects of that or move things around to the benefit of where's the composition. And well, how do you find the composition? Well, you start with the rule of thirds and pick one of those 4 spots and make that your anchor. And that's the easiest way to get to a good composition is one of the 4 spots where those lines intersect should be where the eye is sort of being directed. Mm-hmm. And then everything else will support that. But in that idea of going out to sketch, I am sketching from life, I'm drawing that. But in doing that, I'm building my visual library, of what I know I can just draw and make feel natural because I've done it outside. So, you know, when I'm looking at a photo reference and I want to throw a person in there, I'm gonna put the person I want doing what I want them to do in there. So keeping yourself open to, you know, being creative in the way that you're looking at things. And if part of my problem is, you know, the first 30 years of my career were fantasy based. So I was inventing everything. And part of moving into, you know, more fine art painting was a desire to root myself more in reality. The byproduct of that is I could throw a 50-foot monster in the background if I wanted to, or whatever. I don't. If I get mad at a painting, sometimes I will paint in a beast blowing fire, you know. But the idea so okay, so how do you get that? Like, what do you do if you want to be more creative in your paintings, but you're dealing with you know, you've got just one of those little neighborhood free library books. You don't have the New York Public Library in your head, you know. So the idea of filling yourself with visual inspiration and visual references, and the more diverse range that you can fill that with, the better. I really like Dean Cornwell. All right, he's an illustrator from the Golden Age. I take a lot of inspiration from him in the way that he approaches things. That doesn't mean you have to, but Richard Schmid is an awesome painter. You can get tons of ideas of, but the idea of looking at good art, studying good art, well-informed art that is in the realm of what you like or what you think you want to do. So, building a library of stuff. So like, I really like J.C. Leyendecker. I like Mucha. I like, there's this guy, James Reynolds, Richard Schmid, Trevor Chamberlain, Homer, Remington, Dean Cornwell, Collie Wisson, you know him probably. And even, so this is a book called, it's a compilation book, The Day in the Country, Impressionism in the French Landscape. So it's not so much that I want to paint, and a lot of them is going to be oil, but art is art and good art is good art. Watercolor technique is secondary to that. So, here's a Eugene Boudin. All right, am I going to go and paint some tall masted ships? Probably not, but I can look at the color of the reflections. I can think about the composition. I can think about what he did with the sky there. And it's not that I would try to copy that in watercolor, but I can think about, what's really cool about this is look at the light left through the center of the painting. So, this is fairly dark, but coming right through here is all these really light ochres that kind of come through. That's cool. Maybe I'll use that somewhere, or that will come to me because I've been looking at things, so, even the idea of like this painting is primarily green. So this is sort of blue, but it's really kind of green, but maybe I'll feel like that will come into play somewhere, so that idea of really enriching yourself, who's seen any of Alvaro's train station paintings? Anybody? Did you ever see any of those? What about fucking Monet, right? So I guarantee you Alvaro's seen a Monet painting of a train station, right? So, the idea of, I used to paint with Joseph all the time. I learned a lot from him. You think he's ever seen an Arthur Streeton painting? Go take a look. So the idea of the things that you study will permeate and come into what you're doing. But if you're not looking at any art other than maybe the top 6 watercolor painters, you're going to miss out on a lot. And you're going to miss out on a lot of what could push you into information or inspiration. Let's see. This is mostly French countryside, but the idea of all right, here's another Monet, but how many times have you seen a composition similar to this? Probably a lot. So, the horizon line is in the lower third. Look where that lighthouse is. It's right into that third pocket, like it kind of right over through here. Look at the way the diagonal of the sky coming in this way, coming in this way, coming in this way. Oh, and look at that. These rocks are coming right into here. Oh, wait, what are these rocks doing? They're coming into here. So that idea of like the things I talk about, I'm not making them up. They're here for hundreds of years. And so when I say at least think about the rule of thirds, I don't know, Monet did, Sargent did, any painter you probably like that actually has a well-rounded range of what they do is going to have a back catalog of things that they've either learned from or been inspired by or are continual sources of, we're all a product of, I watch a lot of movies. I really like panoramic landscapes because I watch a lot of movies in that kind of ratio that look cool. So, color palettes. There's a Instagram that I follow called what is it? It's probably cinema palette or movie palette or whatever. And they'll take scenes from movies and then just break down like the color palette of it. And I look at that all the time and I'm like, ooh, what if I do everything in brown, like an Indiana Jones movie? But what's this weird accent color that I didn't notice that happens to go in with that? So, anywhere where you can find those kinds of information and inspiration, and it doesn't it's not like it immediately presents itself, but the more you do things, the more it's the same thing as I try to make myself fight through paintings every now and again, right? So but for the most part, I know I could probably paint what I set out to. That doesn't mean I succeed every time, but I will have a plan of getting to the end there. And so the more you become comfortable in the way that you're working, the more room it allows for these things that you are inspired by or that you like will come up to the surface. So, things that you may want to paint, there's things that I like to paint now that I hated painting before. I either hated it, I couldn't figure it out, or I wouldn't do it because I wasn't capable. And now I'm like, oh, I love painting those rocks or whatever it is, because I've opened up the space to accept a way of doing it, right? And I say this all the time, if you don't like painting street scenes, don't do them. Do landscapes, do other things. There isn't like this docket, this checkbox that you have to fill of, oh, I want to paint stuff, so I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. If there's one subject that you really like painting, then that's fine to paint. And as you become more and more comfortable with that, you'll find yourself wanting to paint other things or thinking about other things that will, even still life, right? I hate painting still. I hated painting still life. Nothing. I was never interested in it. Never, whatever. So I got into last winter. I think I started doing some, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever, because you're painting from life, but you're in the studio. You can arrange it the way you want to arrange it. You can learn about form, space, color. It's probably the best thing to learn from. Go take an orange, put it on the counter, paint it.
The light source, change the light source and create
all that stuff. And because what it's going to do is just build your knowledge of creating form, of light, of changing color, like all those things, without having to get involved with, I like atmospheric perspective. I like that feeling of depth and expanse. But if you can paint an orange here and an orange back here, just a few inches away, and make them feel separate, that will enable you to paint from here to Kentucky. I don't know, can't see that far. Here to Kansas, maybe Oklahoma. Anyway, from the top of the mountain. But
Dan, you were saying a bit ago that how important it is to practice, and you were kind of using musical instruments as an analogy. It reminded me a little bit the movie and play or musical The Music Man, where Professor Hill conned everybody into thinking that they didn't really need instruments. The kids would just go around and pretend that they were playing. And then, of course, when the instruments came, they sounded horrible. But of course, parents thought they were wonderful because they're parents. But sometimes I'm reminded of that when I find myself just taking classes, reading books, watching videos, that none of that really matters unless I get my brush wet or I get my pencil. I mean, I have to actually do it to learn what it is that I'm hearing. But
Right.
sometimes it's just more fun to just sit and read it.
No, I know. So I don't know. I just in my new, my last newsletter, I talked about that a little bit with the idea of, being inspired and being motivated. And, like I just watched a Dave Dibble workshop. And he's an oil painter. But it was all on it was actually on see how much I paid attention. There was a lot on tone and value, and he's an oil painter, and so there's things that on there where I can take the idea from, but I'm not necessarily going to practice exactly what he's saying, but the concepts are there. And but that idea of enjoying it and being motivated and being inspired to do it, if it just stops at the click of a button or the click of a DVD, it's not really beneficial. So I have a good friend who I worked with for a couple of years, and she's smart as a whip, and she's like, I understand the concepts. Why can't I do it? And I'm like, well, when's the last time you painted? And she's like, I don't know, 6 months ago. And like, she would come to workshops, and like, she's a lot of fun. I really love her. But it was just that. It was that unless you are actually, because the processing in real time of like when it's your decisions to make. So, in that idea of watching things and learning from things, the real thing to take away is it has nothing, it'll never have anything really to do with actual I'll tell you right now, if I repainted this painting right now for myself, it would be 30 times better, because I'm not worried about doing things that I might need to do that are off the rules in a way of, or will be confusing in the way I present things. So, I'm trying to do things in a way where I can keep it explainable, because the most important thing to really pay attention is the stuff coming out of my mouth, not so much what's happening on the paper. And that's the same in in-person workshops. Aside from like watching what's happening in the palette, like really like looking at how those consistencies or colors are happening in the palette. And that's why I keep the camera over that part, because if you replay the 4-second clip where I'm mixing, go over to your palette and say, oh, let me see if I can do that. And that idea of the speed and the motion of how I'm mixing is more important than what's being put onto the paper, more often than not. But staying inspired, staying motivated is really important. But we're all busy. I'd love to just sit and look at my books, and it's like I have to make myself do it. Like I have to say, just make yourself a cup of tea and go sit and look at your books. It's going to snow out, whatever it is happening. But it's I like it so much, but I still find myself having to really think about making the space for that. And looking at stuff online is the same. It's fine, but to me, there's nothing like holding the book. It makes more sense than holding it my iPad. Just even the way the light is being projected at me when I'm looking in a book, I feel like I can spend more time with it. I can get up close, I can move back, and I can engage with it more. And the museum's the best place, but that becomes a hassle, so on a daily basis, so making time to fill your cup with varied inspiration, and the same way filling your sketchbook fills your muscle memory, filling your actual memory with, oh, I really like, how did Sargent paint that? Well, oh, there's yellow ochre and then there's blue, and oh my God, there's only a couple little points of dark in there. So, when you look at stuff that you like, also engage with it and think about it, and think about how maybe they got to that point. Because this is, painting's fun. I mean, it is, it's great. It's great fun. It's easy. It's not easy. It's easy to just get your brush wet, get in the palette and make a mess and have fun. Like, and there's so much enjoyment in the act of actually doing it. But it gets so much more fun when you sort of know where you're going before you're like, well, that one didn't work out. Like I'll pretty much know from the first 5 or 10 minutes if I should even continue. And usually I fight my way through, and because even the ones that are going wrong, don't abandon, work through it, because you'll learn so much in trying to get there. Don't worry about the dumb little mistakes, just keep working through. And because if nothing else, you're moving your brush around, you're mixing colors, you're holding it, it's all that combination of muscle memory and yeah. So anyway, it's 4 o'clock my time, which means it's 6 o'clock your time. And it's funny because I knew this was going to be a small group with this particular subject. And, I hope you can pick up on all the other little nuggets that are in here, because it's really, the subject is really just a carrier for me to talk about the other important stuff that go into this particular subject. But the things that go into the subject will go into every other subject. So, when you think about painting, when you think about the approach of how you're doing things, there are some particulars about building depth within one little dark space. In this, there's some particulars on the idea of figures and getting that. But the next time you're doing a tree and you're coming down to the base of the tree and where it's hitting the ground, it would be no different than what's happening in here. Just the shapes are different. It's like a different. So try to get out of the idea of the I am painting this, or this is a blank in my painting, this is a car, this is a thing. That car would be no different than a boulder sitting in a field. It wouldn't have a shiny window, but in the overall scheme of tone and placement and stuff, I could do a mountain canyon scene with boulders and use the exact same concept in New York scene with cars. It would be different textures, obviously, but the theory would all be kind of similar. So the more you can break into abstract thinking, and it's hard. I mean, I'm not saying that's easy. It's really hard for me to, even the idea of where, like, again, this is just a sketch, but where like these two buildings kind of are different, that could have just been all meshed together. And it would still, because the only thing that's important is going to be what's happening around the cafe scene. So, really clue into your subjects, what's important in the painting. That doesn't mean everything else can look like shit, but you can pay a lot less attention to them. Okay. Anybody else have a question or a comment? I got to get some chili.
I was just going to tell you that I had a painting that I had been working on, and I stopped working on it because I got to reflections and in the water, and I realized I didn't have the skills. I just didn't know how to do it, and I left it sit for, I don't know, almost a year, and then we were studying reflections and water and boats and all that kind of stuff, and I looked back at it and I went, I know how to do that now.
Oh, cool. Well, good.
And so I went in and I finished it.
Yeah.
And I entered it into a show and got accepted.
Hey, congratulations.
Oh,
That's great.
that's
So
cool.
that was a plus, it doesn't look like anything you would paint, but
I hope
there's
not.
a little bit of it in there that,
Well,
that
good.
you know, that it's just the confidence of knowing what to do with the reflections and not to do too much.
Well, that's great. That's good to hear. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Awesome.
And I seem to be developing a fishing theme.
Oh yeah. Right.
I don't know why, but
Well, good. There's a lot of people fish.
yeah, who knows?
You know,
They'll like it.
I don't like to fish, but I do like to paint fishermen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
You
fish.
know, guys standing in the middle of a stream, that's fine. You know, like that's great. Cool. Mhm.
So I guess thank you.
Thank you. It's great to
Thank
see
you.
you,
This
Angie.
was great.
And thanks everybody for joining on here. A few of you I'll see you next week. A few of you, I miss Bob. He's out there in California. He came to the Balboa workshop. And we had a lot of fun. I haven't even told the story yet, but somebody got their easel knocked over. That was really the last day we were painting, this angry guy came walking by and shoved somebody's setup over, and you know, rich billionaires, what can you do? You know.
You can go after them.
Tell them a painting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Terrible.
Anyway, we had a good time. Jay was there too.
Yeah. Good to see you, Bob.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So, Kim, where do you live?
Hi.
Hi.
I live in Huntington Beach.
Oh, you are there. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
so. And I just kind of spaced it because I thought you were who I thought you were, and then I got worried that you weren't. So-
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was my first one.
Oh, cool. Well, thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, that's cool.
And Connie, where are you again? I always forget.
I'm in Seattle, just north
Oh.
of Seattle.
Nice.
Plenty of beautiful things to paint around here, and we
I
try to
know.
do it in here all year long, but
I just I'm supposed to do a demo for the Watercolor Society up there.
Northwest Watercolor Society?
I think so. I think, yeah. There's a newer guy who's doing bookings, so it's going to be a Zoom thing, but I'm doing something up there. I mean, not up there, zoomed up there. But I got to go visit my mom. They live up in I always forget the name, but my mom and sister live up there. But
They do have,
Kim and
they
Bob.
book a wonderful artist. I actually attended one of their workshops yesterday, so this is a full weekend for me.
Oh,
George
cool.
George Politis
Oh,
did
yeah.
a 4-hour workshop on kind of rusty lock stuff, and he's
Yeah.
such a good teacher.
Oh, he's cool. Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's nice. That's all that up close, more hyper realistic-y texture stuff, right?
in a way, but not photorealism. I mean, he really was making it up as he went along, and so it was kind of a whole lesson on how to, you know, granulating paints and textures and mixing paints on the paper, and really paying attention to what the paper is telling you and the paint's telling you. He showed us the same photo he's painted like 6 times, and they were all very different.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's
Cool.
not the photorealism. It just is supposed to look like a lock, but
Right.
he's just using the lock as an opportunity to paint a really interesting design. So
Yeah.
that was fun.
Cool. Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, and Brad, nice to see Brad again too. He's muted, but he's there. All right, so I'm going to sign off, and this recording will be up. It'll probably even be up later tonight. I just have to get it downloaded, back uploaded, and then put back on the site. But the reference photos, and there'll be some, you know, I'm going to put up a few different reference photos that all speak to the idea of this, and little pictures of the drawings and stuff, and the demos. Those will all be up and accessible. So you can go back and check.
Where
them out.
will they be on your site?
So the same place you click to get the Zoom link. So when you click
Okay.
that, instead of the Zoom link, it'll just have all the stuff. It'll have the videos
Uh,
and pictures and stuff.
Because
And,
I missed the first part.
okay, yeah, that'll be up there.
Good.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. So nice to see
Thank you,
everybody.
Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks,
See
Dan.
you soon. Thanks, guys. All right. Have a great rest of Sunday. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.